Still up? Yeah, I've had nights like that too, when every little noise seems louder and your thoughts just won't slow down. So, stay here with me for a while. I've got 5 stories ready for you. Nothing too sharp, nothing too strong, just a gentle drift you can follow until sleep finally finds you. Story 1. The package addressed to someone who died years ago. The package was waiting on my porch when I got home from work. Brown cardboard, about the size of a shoebox, sitting right in front of the door like it belonged there. I almost kicked it aside before I noticed the name on the label, Walter Grimsby. I didn't know any Walter Grimsby. I'd lived in this house for 6 months, inherited it from my grandmother after she passed, and in all that time I'd never received mail for anyone except her. The occasional catalog still came addressed to Eleanor Vance, and once in a while a sympathy card from someone who hadn't heard she was gone. But Walter Grimsby? The name meant nothing to me. I checked the address. It was definitely my house, 714 Maple Street, the old Victorian on the corner with the wraparound porch and the weathered blue paint my grandmother had never gotten around to updating. The postmark was from 3 days ago, sent from somewhere in Ohio. No return address. I should have left it alone. Should have written, "Return to sender," on the label and dropped it back in the mailbox. But something about it bothered me. The weight of it, maybe. Heavier than a shoebox should be. Or the way my name wasn't anywhere on it. But it had still ended up on my porch, waiting for me specifically. I took it inside. My name is Thomas. I'm 32, recently divorced, working remotely for a software company that doesn't care where I live as long as I meet my deadlines. When my grandmother died last spring, leaving me her house and everything in it, moving seemed like the obvious choice. Fresh start, new town, a place where no one knew about the marriage that had fallen apart, or the months I'd spent sleeping on my brother's couch, trying to figure out what came next. The house was old but solid, built in 1923, according to the records at the county clerk's office. My grandmother had lived here for almost 50 years, ever since she'd married my grandfather and moved in as a young bride. She'd raised my mother in this house, watched my grandfather die in the bedroom upstairs, spent the last decade of her life alone with her memories and her garden and the slow, quiet rhythms of a small town that had mostly forgotten she existed. I loved her. I hadn't visited as often as I should have, but I loved her. And walking through her rooms, surrounded by her furniture and her photographs and the faint, lingering scent of the lavender sachets she'd kept in every drawer, I felt closer to her than I had in years. The house was a gift, a second chance. I set the package on the kitchen table and stared at it. Walter Grimsby. Who the hell was Walter Grimsby? I tried the obvious routes first. A quick internet search turned up nothing useful, a few Facebook profiles, an obituary for a man in Florida, none of them connected to this address. I searched my grandmother's name alongside his, looking for any link, any connection. Nothing. Then I thought about the house itself. Maybe Walter Grimsby had lived here before my grandparents. Maybe this was old mail, somehow delayed for decades, finally catching up to an address that had changed hands long ago. The county clerk's office was closed for the evening, but I found property records online. The house had been sold to my grandfather, Richard Vance, in 1974. Before that, it had belonged to a family called Morrison, and before them, going back to the original construction, Grimsby, Walter and Helen Grimsby, 1923 to 1951. I felt a chill that I couldn't quite explain. The house's original owners, a man who'd lived in these rooms almost a century ago, whose hands had touched these walls, whose footsteps had worn paths in these floorboards, and someone was sending him packages. I dug deeper. Historical records, newspaper archives, the kind of rabbit holes you fall into when you're alone in an old house and the evening is stretching long. It took almost an hour, but I found it. Walter Grimsby had died in 1951 in this house. in the upstairs bedroom that I'd been sleeping in for 6 months. The newspaper article was brief, a small notice in the local paper, the kind of thing they printed when someone unremarkable passed away. Walter Grimsby, 54, died at home after a short illness, survived by his wife Helen. Services to be held at the First Methodist Church. He'd been dead for over 70 years. And 3 days ago, someone had mailed him a package. I looked at the box on my kitchen table. The cardboard was new, the tape fresh, the postmark clearly dated this month, this year. This wasn't old mail finally catching up. Someone had deliberately sent a package to a dead man at an address he hadn't occupied in 7 decades. Why? I should have called the police, should have treated it as suspicious, potentially dangerous, the kind of thing you don't open without knowing what's inside. But the rational part of my brain was losing ground to something else. Curiosity. The same stubborn need to understand that had made me a good programmer and a terrible husband. I got a knife from the drawer, slit the tape carefully, half expecting something to jump out at me. Inside, nestled in a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a photograph. It showed a man standing on a porch. This porch, I recognized the railing, the shape of the columns, the way the house rose behind him in the background. He was middle-aged, dressed in clothes from another era, squinting against the sun with a slight smile on his face. Walter Grimsby. It had to be. I turned the photograph over. On the back, written in neat, careful handwriting, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. He's still here. I looked up from the photograph. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet, the house too large, the shadows in the corners too deep. And somewhere upstairs, in the bedroom where Walter Grimsby had died 70 years ago, a floorboard creaked. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses do that. They shift and groan, especially when the temperature changes, especially at night when everything else goes quiet. I'd heard those creaks 100 times since moving in. They meant nothing, but I'd never heard them while holding a photograph of a dead man with the words, "He's still here," written on the back. I set the photo down on the table. My hands weren't shaking, not quite, but there was a tremor in my chest, a quickening pulse that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct. The house felt different now, heavier, like the walls were listening. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, even though every light in the kitchen was already on. The stairs were at the front of the house, through the living room, past the grandfather clock that hadn't worked in years. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, the beam of my flashlight cutting through shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. The staircase groaned under my weight. 14 steps. I'd counted them once during those first weeks when everything about the house felt new and strange. Halfway up, I stopped, listened. Nothing. Just the tick of the radiator in the hallway, the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I kept climbing. The upstairs hallway was narrow and dark, lit only by a small window at the far end that let in the faint glow of the streetlight outside. 3 doors, the bathroom, the guest room I used for storage, and the master bedroom. My bedroom. Walter Grimsby's bedroom. The door was closed. I always left it open. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that closed door, trying to remember if I'd pulled it shut that morning. I hadn't. I never did. The bedroom got stuffy if the door was closed, and I liked the cross breeze from the hallway window. Someone had closed it. Something had closed it. I reached for the knob. The brass was cold under my fingers, colder than it should have been, cold like it had been sitting in a freezer. I turned it slowly, felt the latch click, pushed the door open. The room was empty. My bed, still unmade from the morning. My laptop on the nightstand, screen dark. The curtains drawn against the night, swaying slightly from the vent overhead. Everything exactly as I'd left it. Everything ordinary and unremarkable, except for the smell. It was faint at first, almost unnoticeable. But as I stepped into the room, it grew stronger. Something floral, like old perfume or dried flowers. Something underneath that, mustier, older. The smell of a room that had been closed up for years, of dust and mothballs and the slow decay of forgotten things. The smell of death, I thought, and then pushed the thought away. Houses hold smells, old houses especially. It didn't mean anything. I checked the closet, empty except for my clothes, under the bed. Nothing but dust bunnies I kept meaning to clean. The window was locked, the glass intact. No one had been here. No one could have been here. But the door had been closed, and the smell was getting stronger. I noticed it then, a spot on the floor near the foot of the bed. The hardwood was darker there, the finish worn away to bare wood. I'd seen it before, during my first walk through with the realtor. She'd said it was water damage, probably from a leak years ago that had been repaired. But kneeling down now, shining my flashlight across the grain, I could see it wasn't water damage at all. The stain was too regular, too concentrated, roughly the size and shape of a person lying down. This was where he'd died. Walter Grimsby had collapsed right here, 70 years ago, and his body had lain long enough to leave a mark. I'd been sleeping 3 feet from this spot for 6 months. I stood up too fast, head swimming, and that's when I heard it. Not a creak this time, a whisper, low and rasping, coming from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls themselves. Thomas. My name. Something had said my name. I ran. There's no other word for it. I turned and bolted out of that room, down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door. I didn't stop until I was standing in the middle of the lawn, the cold night air burning my lungs, staring up at the house I'd thought was a gift. The bedroom window was dark. All the windows were dark now, though I could have sworn I'd left lights on. The house looked abandoned, dead, like it had been empty for years. And in the bedroom window, for just a moment, I saw a shape, a silhouette, standing motionless, watching me from behind the glass. Then it was gone. I slept in my car that night. Parked at a 24-hour gas station 3 miles away, reclined the seat, and stared at the ceiling until dawn crept through the windshield. I kept the photograph with me. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof that I hadn't imagined it. Maybe I just didn't want to leave it behind in that house. In the morning light, everything felt different, less terrifying, more absurd. I was a grown man who'd fled his own home because of a creaky floor and a weird smell. The whisper, the silhouette, those could have been anything. Stress, exhaustion, the power of suggestion after reading about a dead man and then receiving his mail. But I didn't go back to the house. Not yet. Instead, I went to the library. The local historical society kept archives going back to the town's founding. I spent the morning digging through old newspapers, property records, anything that mentioned Walter Grimsby or 714 Maple Street. The librarian, an elderly woman who seemed delighted to have a researcher, helped me navigate the collection. By noon, I had a much clearer picture of Walter Grimsby, and a much bigger problem. He hadn't just died in that house, he'd been murdered. The official story was illness, a short illness, according to the obituary. But I found another article from a newspaper in the next county, dated a week after his death. It mentioned rumors of foul play, mentioned that his wife Helen had left town immediately after the funeral and never returned, mentioned that the case had been quietly closed without investigation, swept under the rug by a police department that didn't want the scandal. And at the bottom of the article, a single chilling line. Sources close to the family suggest that Mr. Grimsby may have known his killer and may have been trying to warn someone before he died. I looked at the photograph again, at Walter Grimsby's face, squinting in the sunlight, unaware of what was coming. He's still here. Maybe the message wasn't about his ghost. Maybe it was about whoever had killed him. And maybe, after 70 years, they'd finally come back. I spent the afternoon at the library, pulling every thread I could find. The more I dug, the stranger the story became. Walter Grimsby had been a successful man by small-town standards. He'd owned the local hardware store, served on the town council, married Helen Pierce in 1920. By all accounts, they'd been happy, or at least they'd appeared happy, which in 1950s America was often the same thing. No children, but a nice house, a respected name, the kind of life people envied. Then, in March of 1951, Walter had started acting strangely. The newspaper accounts were vague, but I pieced together a picture from society columns and town meeting minutes. He'd grown paranoid, convinced someone was watching him. He'd installed extra locks on all the doors. He'd stopped going to his store, stopped attending council meetings, stopped leaving the house at all. His wife told people he was ill, overworked, just needed rest. 6 weeks later, he was dead. I found one more article, this one from a regional paper that had been more willing to ask uncomfortable questions. It mentioned that Walter had written letters in the weeks before his death, frantic letters to old friends and distant relatives, warning them about something. The letters had never been found. Neither had whatever he was warning them about. The case was closed. Helen Grimsby collected her husband's life insurance, sold everything they owned, and vanished. No forwarding address, no family to track. She'd simply ceased to exist, as thoroughly as if she'd never been born at all. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The library was quiet, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, dust motes drifting in the light. Everything felt normal, safe. Like murder and mysteries belonged to another world entirely. But someone had sent that package. Someone who knew Walter Grimsby's name, who had a photograph of him standing on my porch, who had written those 3 words on the back. Someone who was still alive, still out there, still connected to whatever had happened 70 years ago. I needed to find out who. The postmark was from a town called Ridgefield, Ohio, about 4 hours east of here. I searched for connections between Ridgefield and the Grimsbys, between Ridgefield and my grandmother, between Ridgefield and anyone I could think of. Nothing obvious. Just another small town, population 8,000, the kind of place you'd drive through without noticing. But the package had come from there, and packages don't send themselves. I went back to the house that evening. I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe, or the refusal to let myself be driven out of my own home by something I couldn't explain. The sun was setting as I pulled into the driveway, painting the old Victorian in shades of orange and red. It looked peaceful, beautiful even. I didn't trust it. The front door was unlocked. I'd locked it when I left. I was certain of that, but the knob turned freely in my hand. Inside, the house was cold and still. All the lights I'd left on the night before were off. The only illumination came from the fading daylight filtering through the windows. I moved through the rooms slowly, checking each one. Living room, clear. Kitchen, clear. Dining room. The package was on the table, not where I'd left it. I'd taken the photograph with me, left the box on the counter by the sink. Now it was sitting in the center of the dining room table, positioned carefully, deliberately, like someone had placed it there for me to find. My heart started pounding. Someone had been here. Someone had moved the package, unlocked the door, turned off the lights. While I was at the library, researching a 70-year-old murder, someone had walked into my house. I should have left, should have called the police, reported a break-in, let professionals handle whatever was happening. But the box was open now. The flaps pulled back, revealing something that hadn't been there before. More photographs. A whole stack of them, maybe 20 or 30, fanned out across the newspaper bedding like a deck of cards. I approached the table like it might explode. Picked up the first photograph with trembling hands. It was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, dark hair pinned back in the style of the 1940s. She was standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, smiling at the camera. On the back, in the same neat handwriting, Helen Pierce, 1945. Helen, Walter's wife, the woman who'd disappeared after his death. I flipped through the rest of the photos. Helen at different ages in different places. Helen at her wedding, standing next to Walter. Helen in front of the hardware store. Helen in the garden of this house, my house, kneeling among flowers that had died decades before I was born. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a photograph that made my stomach drop. It was Helen again, older now, maybe in her 50s. She was standing in front of a small house with a mailbox out front, the numbers clearly visible. 1847 Maple Street, Ridgefield, Ohio, the town where the package had been sent from. Helen Grimsby hadn't disappeared. She'd just moved, changed her name, started over, let everyone believe she was gone. But someone knew where she was. Someone had tracked her down. I turned the photograph over. She thought she got away with it. She was wrong. The handwriting was different this time, shakier, more jagged, like it had been written by a different hand entirely, or by the same hand, decades apart. And at the bottom, one more line. Ask her what she did to me. The lights in the house flickered. Just once, just for a moment, but enough to make me look up from the photograph. The sun had set while I was absorbed in the pictures. The dining room was nearly dark now, shadows pooling in the corners, the windows reflecting my own pale face back at me. Then I heard it. Not from upstairs this time, from the basement. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbing the stairs toward the door that opened into the kitchen. Someone was in my house. Someone was coming up. The basement door creaked open, and the footsteps stopped. I couldn't see into the kitchen from where I stood. Couldn't see who or what had just emerged from the darkness below, but I could feel it watching me. That same presence I'd sensed the night before. That weight in the air, that certainty of being observed. Thomas. The voice was a whisper, barely audible, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Not quite male, not quite female. Just old. Impossibly old. You found her. Now bring her back to me. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged white in front of my face. And in the doorway to the kitchen, something darker than shadow began to take shape. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as the darkness condensed, thickened, became something almost human. A man's shape, tall and thin, standing in the doorway with arms hanging loose at his sides. The features were indistinct, smudged, like a photograph left out in the rain. But I could see enough. The slope of the shoulders, the tilt of the head. Walter Grimsby, dead for 70 years, and standing in my kitchen. You found her. The voice came from the shape, but also from the walls, the floor, the air itself. It vibrated in my chest, resonated in my bones. After all this time, someone finally found her. I tried to speak, but my throat had seized shut. The cold was getting worse, pressing in from all sides, squeezing the warmth from my body. Frost was forming on the photographs, scattered across the table, crystalline patterns spreading across Helen's frozen smile. She poisoned me. The shape drifted closer, not walking, just moving, sliding across the floor like smoke. Arsenic in my coffee, a little more each morning, for weeks. She watched me suffer and she smiled, Thomas. She smiled and told me I was just tired, just overworked, just needed rest. I found my voice. It came out as a croak, barely audible. Why? Because I knew what she was. He was close now, close enough that I could see the hollow spaces where his eyes should be. I found out what she'd done before. The others she'd married, the others she'd killed. I was going to expose her. I was going to tell everyone. The cold was inside me now, spreading through my veins like ice water. I could feel myself fading, feel my grip on consciousness starting to slip. This was how it ended. This was how Walter had felt in his final moments, his body shutting down while his wife watched and waited. But she was faster, Walter continued. She killed me before I could warn anyone, took my money, took my life, took everything. And I've been waiting here ever since, trapped in the place where I died, waiting for someone to find the truth. The package, I gasped. You sent the package. It took me decades to learn how. A sound came from the shape, something that might have been a laugh, bitter and hollow. To touch the physical world, to influence it. But I couldn't leave this house, couldn't track her down myself. I needed someone living, someone who would look, someone who would care. Why me? Because you're like me. The shape leaned closer, and for a moment I could see his face clearly. The face from the photograph, gaunt and desperate and terribly sad. Alone. Betrayed. Starting over in a place that feels like a cage. I saw myself in you, Thomas. I thought you might understand. I was shaking now from cold and fear and something else. Something that felt almost like sympathy. This wasn't a monster. This was a man who'd been murdered by someone he trusted, left to rot in a house that became his prison. 70 years of waiting, of watching, of hoping that someday someone would hear his story. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry for what happened to you, but I can't. I don't know what you want me to do. Find her. The desperation in his voice was palpable, a physical weight in the air. She's still alive, 94 years old, living in that house in Ohio, still using the name she stole from me. Find her and bring her back here. Make her face what she did. And then what? You'll kill her? The shape flickered. For a moment, Walter looked almost uncertain. I don't know. I've thought about it for so long. Revenge, justice, making her feel what I felt. But maybe I just need her to admit it, to say out loud what she did to me, to acknowledge that I existed, that I mattered, that my death meant something. The cold was receding now. Slowly, degree by degree, the room was warming. Walter's form was becoming less solid, less present, like a radio signal fading. Please, he whispered. I've been alone for so long. I can't rest until this is finished. I can't move on until she answers for what she did. I thought about Helen Grimsby, 94 years old, living under a false name, carrying a secret that had followed her for 7 decades. I thought about Walter, trapped in this house, watching families come and go, unable to speak, unable to touch, unable to do anything but wait. I thought about justice, about how long it can take, and how little it sometimes means. I'll find her, I said. The shape of Walter Grimsby solidified for just a moment. The hollow eyes seemed to brighten, the smudged features sharpening into something almost like relief. Thank you. His voice was clearer now, more human. Thank you, Thomas. Then he was gone. The cold vanished, the shadows retreated, and I was standing alone in my dining room, surrounded by photographs of a murderer and the promise I'd just made to her victim. I drove through the night, 4 hours on empty highways, the photographs on the passenger seat beside me. The image of Walter's desperate face burned into my brain. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. Confront an old woman? Demand a confession? Call the police and tell them about a 70-year-old cold case that had been solved by a ghost? It sounded insane. It was insane. But I'd made a promise, and something in me, something that had been broken by my divorce, by my failures, by all the times I'd let myself down, needed to keep it, needed to do one thing right. Ridgefield, Ohio was exactly what I'd expected. Small, quiet, the kind of town that looked frozen in time. I found 1847 Maple Street just as the sun was coming up, a modest house, white siding, a garden that had been carefully tended despite the cold. The mailbox said H. Monroe. Helen Monroe, Helen Pierce Grimsby, hiding in plain sight for 7 decades. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the house, watching the curtains in the front window, the faint glow of a light inside. She was awake, 94 years old and still getting up with the sun. I thought about turning around, going home, letting the dead stay buried and the living stay hidden. Then I thought about Walter, alone in that house, waiting for justice that would never come. I got out of the car, walked up the path, raised my hand to knock. The door opened before I touched it, and there she was. Helen Grimsby, small and frail, wrapped in a cardigan against the morning chill. Her hair was white, her face a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp, alert. The eyes of a woman who had spent her whole life watching, waiting, expecting this moment to come. "You're Thomas," she said. Her voice was stronger than I'd expected, steady. "Walter's been busy, hasn't he?" I wondered how long it would take before someone came. She stepped aside, gesturing into the house. "You'd better come in. We have a lot to talk about." The inside of Helen's house was warm and neat, filled with the accumulated clutter of a long life. Photographs on every surface, books stacked on end tables, the smell of lavender and something baking in the kitchen. She led me to a small sitting room, gestured to a chair, and lowered herself onto the sofa across from me with the careful movements of someone whose body had become a burden. "I suppose he told you I poisoned him," she said. No preamble, no pretense. Just the directness of someone who'd been carrying a secret for 70 years and was finally ready to set it down. "Yes, he's not wrong." She folded her hands in her lap. Those sharp eyes never left my face. "I put arsenic in his coffee for 6 weeks. I watched him get sicker and sicker, and I never called a doctor. When he finally died, I cleaned up the evidence, collected the insurance, and ran." I didn't know what to say. I'd expected denial, excuses, something other than this calm, matter-of-fact confession. She spoke about murder the way someone might describe an unpleasant chore they'd had to complete. "Why?" It was the only word I could manage. Helen was quiet for a long moment. The morning light shifted through the curtains, casting patterns on the worn carpet. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked steadily. "Did Walter tell you about the others?" she asked. "The women before me?" He said you'd killed other husbands, that he was going to expose you." A thin smile crossed her face. Not cruel, exactly, just tired. He got half of it right. There was one other. Before Walter, when I was young and foolish and thought marriage meant love. His name was Edward, and he beat me so badly I lost the baby I was carrying. So I put rat poison in his dinner, and I never lost a moment's sleep over it. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "I thought Walter was different. Gentle, kind, the sort of man who would never raise a hand to a woman. And he wasn't violent, I'll give him that. But there are other ways to hurt someone, Thomas. There are other kinds of prison." "What do you mean?" "He controlled everything. The money, the house, who I could see, where I could go. I wasn't allowed to have friends, wasn't allowed to work, wasn't allowed to exist outside the role he'd assigned me. The perfect wife, the silent companion, the possession he displayed at dinner parties." Her voice hardened. "He found out about Edward. I don't know how. Maybe he hired someone to look into my past. And instead of going to the police, he used it, held it over me, told me that if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I hanged for murder." The clock ticked. The light shifted. I sat there, trying to reconcile the desperate ghost in my house with the monster Helen was describing. "So you killed him?" "So I killed him." She said it simply, without remorse. "I spent 3 years as his prisoner, and when I finally found the courage to escape, I used the only method that wouldn't lead straight back to me. He was right that I'd done it before. He just didn't understand why. And then you disappeared. I became someone else, built a new life, kept my head down, never let anyone get close enough to learn the truth. She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. I knew this day would come eventually. Walter was always stubborn. Even death wouldn't stop him from getting his revenge. I thought about the ghost in my house, the desperation in his voice, the loneliness in his hollow eyes. He'd seemed so certain of his righteousness, so convinced that he was the victim. But victims don't always stay victims. Sometimes they become something else. He wants you to come back, I said, to the house, to face him. Helen laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Of course he does. 70 years, and he still thinks he's owed something. Still thinks I belong to him. Do you? Owe him something, I mean. She considered the question. Her hands, spotted with age, trembled slightly in her lap. I took his life. That's not nothing. But he took mine first, just slower, quieter, in ways that didn't leave marks. We're both guilty, Thomas. We're both victims. That's the truth of it. And there's no confession or confrontation that's going to make it simple. I sat with that for a while. The certainty I'd felt driving through the night was crumbling, replaced by something murkier. I'd come here for justice. I'd come here to keep a promise. But justice was starting to look a lot more complicated than a ghost had made it seem. What do you want me to do? I asked. Helen smiled again, sad this time, resigned. That's not my choice to make. You can take me back to that house, let Walter have whatever satisfaction a dead man can get, or you can leave, go home, tell him what I told you, and let him make of it what he will. She spread her hands. I'm 94 years old. I'll be dead soon either way. The only question is whether my last act is surrender or defiance. I drove back alone. I left Helen in her small house with her photographs and her secrets and the life she'd built from the ashes of her crimes. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was cowardice. I still don't know. When I got home, the house was quiet. No cold spots, no whispers, no presence watching from the shadows. I walked through every room, calling Walter's name, but nothing answered. The photographs were still on the dining table where I'd left them, Helen's face staring up at me from a dozen different angles. I told him anyway, spoke out loud to the empty rooms, recounting everything Helen had said. The abuse, the control, the prison of a marriage that had looked perfect from the outside. I told him she wasn't coming back. I told him the truth was messier than he'd wanted it to be. I don't know if he heard me. I don't know if ghosts can change their minds, can accept new information, can grow and evolve the way the living do. Maybe Walter is still there, still waiting, still certain that he was wronged and she was evil, and someday someone will finish what I refused to do. Or maybe he finally understood. Maybe the truth, complicated and ugly and impossible to resolve, was enough to set him free. I sold the house 3 months later. Couldn't sleep in that bedroom anymore. Couldn't walk past the dining room without seeing the photographs. Couldn't exist in those rooms without feeling the weight of all that history pressing down. I moved back to the city, found an apartment with no past, started building a life that was entirely my own. But I kept one photograph. Walter and Helen on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing in front of the house where everything would fall apart. I keep it in a drawer, and sometimes, late at night, I take it out and look at it. Two people who destroyed each other. Two stories that couldn't both be true. A ghost and a murderer, and the uncomfortable space between justice and revenge. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. The dead don't always tell the truth. They remember what they want to remember, believe what they need to believe. And the living aren't any better. We rewrite our histories, justify our sins, convince ourselves that we're the hero of every story we tell. The only real truth is that it's never simple. The packages that arrive from the past, addressed to people who died decades ago, always contain more questions than answers, more shadows than light. I never heard from Walter again. I hope that means he's at peace. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I think about Helen, still alive as far as I know, still carrying her secrets, still waiting for the end. And I wonder if she ever thinks about him, if she ever regrets what she did, if she ever wakes up cold in the middle of the night, certain that someone is standing in the doorway, watching her with hollow eyes. I hope so. Not because I think she deserves to suffer, but because remembering is the least we owe to the people we've destroyed, even when they were destroying us right back. Story 2. The voicemail recorded while my phone was off. I found the voicemail on a Tuesday morning, buried in my notifications between a spam call from a car warranty company and a reminder about my dentist appointment. One new voicemail received at 3:47 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize. That wasn't unusual. I'm a social worker for the county, which means my number gets passed around to clients, agencies, crisis hotlines. Strange calls at strange hours come with the territory. I almost deleted it without listening. I was running late for work, already juggling coffee and car keys and the mental checklist of everything I needed to accomplish that day. But something made me stop. The timestamp, maybe. 3:47 a.m. My phone had been off at 3:47 a.m. I'd turned it off before bed, the way I always did, because the blue light kept me awake and the anxiety of being constantly available had started following me into my dreams. I remembered turning it off. I remembered the screen going dark, the relief of disconnection. And I remembered turning it back on that morning, watching it boot up, waiting for the notifications to load. The voicemail had been received while my phone was off. That shouldn't have been possible. My name is Audrey. I was 27 that year, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The heat was unreliable, the walls were thin, and my upstairs neighbor had a habit of vacuuming at midnight. But the rent was cheap and the location was good, and after 3 years of living with roommates who left dishes in the sink and passive-aggressive notes on the refrigerator, I'd have paid twice as much for the privilege of solitude. I should have listened to the voicemail right there in my kitchen, in the bright light of morning with the coffee maker gurgling and the sounds of traffic drifting up from the street. But I was late, and the message was probably nothing, and I told myself I'd check it at lunch. I didn't check it at lunch. The day got away from me. An emergency placement, a court hearing that ran long, a teenager in crisis who needed 3 hours of my attention, and every ounce of patience I had left. By the time I got home, it was after 8. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of wine, and collapsed on the couch with the television playing something I didn't have to think about. The voicemail notification was still there, blinking at me from the lock screen. One new message. I pressed play. For the first few seconds, there was nothing, just silence, the dead air of an open line. I almost deleted it. Pocket dial, wrong number, nothing worth the time. But then I heard breathing, slow, steady, close to the microphone, like someone was holding the phone right up to their mouth. Not heavy breathing, not threatening, just present. Someone was there, on the other end of that call, breathing into the silence. And then, beneath the breathing, I heard something else. Faint, almost inaudible, like it was coming from far away. A sound I recognized but couldn't place. A rhythmic creaking, soft and repetitive. The breathing continued, the creaking continued. For almost a full minute, nothing else happened. Then a voice. Quiet, barely above a whisper, impossible to identify as male or female. She's sleeping. A pause. The breathing stopped. The creaking stopped. She doesn't know I'm here. The message ended. I sat there on my couch, the wine glass frozen halfway to my lips, staring at my phone like it had grown teeth. The television was still playing, some cooking competition, the host announcing the next challenge, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could hear was that whisper, playing on repeat in my head. She's sleeping. She doesn't know I'm here. The message had been recorded at 3:47 a.m. I had been sleeping at 3:47 a.m. in this apartment, in my bed, with my phone turned off on the nightstand. Someone had been here. Someone had stood in my apartment, close enough to hear me breathe, and left a voicemail on a phone that wasn't even on. I played the message again, listening harder this time. The breathing, the creaking, the whisper. The creaking sounded familiar now. I knew that sound. I heard it every time I shifted in bed, every time I turned over in the night. It was the sound of my mattress springs. Someone had been in my bedroom, standing over me while I slept, close enough to make the mattress creak when they leaned in, and they'd recorded themselves doing it. I was on my feet before I knew I was moving, checking the locks on the door, still bolted, chain still on, checking the windows, all locked, 3rd floor, no fire escape, checking every room, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. No one. The apartment was empty, exactly as I'd left it that morning. But I found something in the bedroom, on my nightstand, next to where my phone had been charging. A single piece of paper, folded in half. I didn't remember it being there when I'd left for work. I definitely didn't remember putting it there. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Inside, written in neat, careful handwriting, you looked so peaceful. I didn't want to wake you. And below that, in smaller letters, I'll come back tonight. The paper smelled faintly of something I couldn't identify. Something chemical, something sweet, something that made my head swim when I breathed it in too deeply. I dropped it like it was on fire, grabbed my phone, my keys, my wallet. I was out the door in 30 seconds, down the stairs, into my car, driving without knowing where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't be there when night came. Because whoever had stood over my bed at 3:47 a.m., whoever had left that note, whoever had recorded themselves watching me sleep, they'd made a promise. And something told me they intended to keep it. I drove to the police station. It was the only thing that made sense, the only action that felt like something other than running. I sat in the fluorescent-lit waiting area for 45 minutes before an officer took my statement. A tired-looking woman in her 40s who wrote everything down but couldn't quite hide her skepticism. "And you're sure the phone was off?" she asked for the 3rd time. "Positive. I turn it off every night. I remember turning it off." "But you received a voicemail at 3:47 a.m. "That's what I'm telling you. It shouldn't be possible. Someone was in my apartment, and somehow they left a message on a phone that wasn't even on." She wrote something else down. I couldn't see what, but I could guess. Confused, possibly dreaming. No evidence of break-in. The same dismissive shorthand I'd seen in 100 case files when women reported things that didn't fit neatly into boxes. "We can send someone to check your apartment," she said finally, "but without signs of forced entry, without any physical evidence of an intruder." I have the note. I have the voicemail. The note could have been there for days. You said yourself you didn't notice it until tonight, and voicemails can have delayed delivery, especially if there's a network issue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and make her understand, but I knew how this worked. I knew the system from the inside, knew how many reports got filed and forgotten, how many women were told they were overreacting until the moment they weren't. "Please," I said, "just check the apartment, please." They sent 2 officers. I followed in my car, keeping the cruiser's taillights in sight the whole way. The building looked the same as always, brick and concrete, lights in some windows, darkness in others. My third-floor apartment was dark. I'd left in such a hurry I hadn't even turned on a lamp. The officers went in first. I waited in the hallway, listening to them move through the rooms, checking closets, checking windows. It took less than 5 minutes. "All clear," one of them said, emerging into the hallway. "No signs of entry, nothing disturbed. You sure you don't want us to call someone? Family member, maybe? Someone you could stay with tonight?" I didn't have anyone to call. My parents were in Florida, my sister was 3 states away, and the friends I had were work friends. The kind you grabbed lunch with but didn't burden with your crises. The isolation that had felt like freedom 2 days ago now felt like a trap. "I'll be fine," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. They left. I stood in my apartment, doors locked, lights blazing in every room, and tried to convince myself I was safe. The note was gone. I searched everywhere, the nightstand, the floor, under the bed. I'd dropped it when I ran. I was sure of that. It should have been right there, where I'd let it fall. But the nightstand was empty, except for my lamp, my alarm clock, the charger cord snaking toward the outlet. Someone had been here. While I was at the police station, while officers were on their way, someone had come back and taken the only evidence I had. I played the voicemail again, just to make sure it was still there. The silence, the breathing, the whisper. She's sleeping. She doesn't know I'm here. It was the only proof left that I wasn't imagining things. I saved it to my cloud backup. Then I saved it again, to a different account, because paranoia had become the only thing keeping me functional. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, a kitchen knife on the cushion beside me, watching the door. Every sound made me flinch. The radiator clanking, the upstairs neighbor's footsteps, the distant wail of a siren. The night stretched endless and dark beyond my windows, and somewhere in that darkness, someone was waiting. Dawn came eventually, gray light seeping through the curtains, the sounds of the city waking up, the ordinary rhythms of a world that didn't know what had happened in apartment 3B. I made coffee I couldn't drink, showered with the bathroom door open, got dressed for work because I didn't know what else to do. I was checking my email when the notification appeared. New voicemail, received at 3:47 a.m. My hands went cold. I hadn't heard my phone ring. I'd been awake all night, watching the door, and my phone had been silent on the table in front of me. I checked my phone's settings. Do Not Disturb was off. The ringer was on. There was no reason I shouldn't have heard it. I played the message. The same silence, the same breathing. But this time, the whisper was different. "You weren't home last night." A pause. The breathing continued, slow and patient. "That's okay." I waited. Another pause, and then, softer, almost tender. "You should have seen your face when you came back, standing in the hallway, talking to those policemen. You looked so scared. I wanted to tell you everything was going to be okay." My stomach lurched. They'd been here. While the police were checking my apartment, while I was standing in the hallway convincing myself I was safe, they'd been watching. Close enough to see my face, close enough to hear my conversations. The message continued. "I left you a present. Check the bathroom mirror." I didn't want to look. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run again, to get out, to never come back. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I walked to the bathroom. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, moving without my permission, carrying me toward something I didn't want to see. The mirror above the sink was fogged. Not from steam. I hadn't used hot water this morning. But from something else. Something that had been breathed onto the glass in the night, leaving condensation that hadn't yet evaporated. And in that fog, written with a finger, a message. "I can get in whenever I want. Locks don't stop me. Walls don't stop me. Nothing stops me." Below that, a single question. "Are you ready to meet me?" And at the very bottom, so small I almost missed it, a time. Tonight. 3:47 a.m. I stared at the message until my vision blurred, until the words stopped making sense and became just shapes, just marks on glass. Someone was toying with me, someone who could get into my apartment without leaving a trace, someone who could leave voicemails on phones that weren't on, someone who wasn't playing by the rules of reality. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know why they'd chosen me, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had until 3:47 a.m. to figure out how to survive. I called in sick to work, first time in 3 years, but I couldn't sit in an office pretending everything was normal while a clock ticked down to something I couldn't understand. I needed answers. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The voicemails were impossible. I knew that. Phones don't receive calls when they're off, no signal, no connection, no way for data to reach them. And yet, I had 2 messages, both time-stamped 3:47 a.m., both recorded while my phone sat dark and silent on my nightstand. Whatever was happening, it existed outside the rules I understood. I started with the phone number. The calls had come from somewhere, even if the delivery didn't make sense. I ran the number through every search engine I could find, reverse lookups, people finders, the databases I had access to through work. Nothing. The number didn't exist. It wasn't registered to anyone, wasn't connected to any carrier, wasn't even formatted correctly for a standard phone line. Dead end. I tried the building next. Maybe someone had seen something, a stranger in the hallway, an unfamiliar car in the lot. I knocked on doors, made up a story about a package thief, asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual. My neighbors were polite but unhelpful. The woman in 3A worked nights and was never home. The couple in 3C had been out of town for a week. No one had seen anything. No one ever did. By noon, I was running out of options. The police weren't going to help. The building wasn't going to help. I was alone with a deadline and no idea what was coming to meet me. I went back to the voicemails, played them over and over, listening for anything I might have missed. The breathing, the whisper, the creaking of my mattress springs. The second message, with its description of my face in the hallway, its tender promise that everything would be okay. And then I heard it. Underneath the whisper, so faint I'd missed it the first dozen times. A second voice, not whispering, just breathing, soft and shallow, barely audible beneath the primary speaker. 2 people were on that call. 2 people had been in my apartment, standing over my bed, watching me sleep. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't one intruder. This was something else, something organized, something patient. I needed to leave. Not just the apartment, the city. I needed to disappear, the way people do when they're running from something that can't be reasoned with. I started packing a bag, throwing in clothes and chargers and the emergency cash I kept in my sock drawer. My phone buzzed. Text message from the same impossible number. "Where are you going?" I froze, bag half zipped, staring at the screen. They were watching. Right now, in broad daylight, they could see me. Another message. "You can't leave. We're not finished yet." I spun around, searching the windows, the doorway, every corner of the room. Nothing, no one. But they could see me somehow, through a camera I hadn't found, through a window I thought was private, through means I couldn't comprehend. A third message. "Sit down, Audrey. Relax. You're only making this harder on yourself." I didn't sit down. I grabbed my bag and ran. The hallway was empty. The stairwell was empty. I burst through the lobby doors into the afternoon sunlight, gasping, looking everywhere for someone watching me. The street was ordinary, cars passing, a woman walking her dog, a delivery truck double parked at the corner. Nothing threatening, nothing out of place. My phone buzzed again. "Okay, run. It doesn't matter. I know where you'll go. I know everywhere you'll go." I got in my car, Drove without direction, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, watching for anyone following. The streets blurred past, residential, commercial, the highway on-ramp. I drove for an hour before I realized I had nowhere to go. The phone buzzed. The hotel on 5th Street has bed bugs. I'd try the one on Maple. Room 117 is nice. Quiet. They knew. They already knew where I was going to end up before I did. I pulled over, sat in a grocery store parking lot, hands shaking on the wheel, trying to think. This wasn't a normal stalker. This wasn't someone watching from a window or following me in a car. This was something that could predict my movements, read my decisions, see me through walls. Something that had been inside my apartment twice without leaving a trace. Something that wanted me to know how powerless I was. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I looked anyway. You're smart, Audrey. Smarter than the others. That's why I chose you. Others. There had been others, but smart doesn't mean safe. Smart just means you understand what's happening, and understanding doesn't change anything. Another message, a few seconds later, 3:47 a.m. You can be anywhere you want. It won't matter. I'll find you. I always find them. I stared at those words until they burned into my brain. The others. I always find them. This wasn't random. This wasn't personal. I was part of a pattern, a series, a collection of women who'd received impossible voicemails and threatening messages and a deadline they couldn't escape. How many others had there been? What had happened to them? I opened my browser, started searching. Disappearances, stalking cases, women who'd reported strange phone calls before vanishing. The rabbit hole was deep and dark and full of unanswered questions. Missing persons cases with no leads, cold files with no suspects, women who told friends they were being watched, being followed, being hunted, and then were never seen again. I couldn't find a pattern, couldn't find a name, just absence, over and over, the empty spaces where women used to be. The sun was setting. The shadows in the parking lot were growing longer, reaching toward my car like fingers. I had maybe 9 hours until 3:47 a.m. 9 hours to figure out how to fight something that didn't play by any rules I understood. I thought about the police again, about hotels and hiding places and all the useless strategies that assumed my stalker was human. And then I thought about something else. If they could see me everywhere, hear everything, predict every move I made, then maybe the only advantage I had was doing something they wouldn't expect. Something stupid, something dangerous, something like going back to my apartment and waiting for them to come. I turned the car around. If I was going to face this, I wanted to face it on my own ground. Even if that ground was exactly where they wanted me to be. I prepared as best I could, bought a baseball bat from a sporting goods store, picked up a can of pepper spray and a cheap prepaid phone in case mine stopped working. Stopped by a hardware store for extra deadbolts, for a door wedge, for anything that might slow someone down. My phone buzzed while I was in the checkout line. That won't help. I ignored it, paid in cash, drove back to the apartment with my supplies rattling in the passenger seat. The building looked the same as always. Brick and concrete, lights and windows, the ordinary face of a place that had become a hunting ground. I climbed the stairs with the bat over my shoulder, feeling absurd, feeling terrified, feeling like I was walking into a trap I'd designed for myself. The apartment was empty. I checked every room, every closet, every shadow. Then I installed the new locks, wedged the door, pushed the couch against it for good measure. The windows were already locked, but I checked them twice anyway. 3 floors up, no fire escape. The only way in was through the door. I sat down to wait. The hours crawled past. I didn't turn off the lights, didn't try to sleep, didn't do anything except watch the door and listen. The building creaked and settled around me. The radiator clanked. Upstairs, my neighbor's television murmured through the thin ceiling. At midnight, my phone buzzed. You came back. I knew you would. The brave ones always do. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. 3 hours and 47 minutes. Are you scared? Yes, I was terrified. But I was also angry. A cold, hard anger that had been building since the first voicemail, since the first violation of my space, my sleep, my sense of safety. Whoever these people were, they'd made a mistake. They'd given me a deadline instead of taking me by surprise. They'd let me prepare. The messages kept coming, one every hour, each one more intimate, more knowing. 1:47 a.m. You're sitting on the couch. The bat is beside you. You think it will help. 2:47 a.m. Your hands are shaking. That's okay. Fear is natural. Fear means you understand. I didn't look at my phone anymore. Just let the buzzes wash over me, each one a reminder that I was being watched, that privacy was an illusion, that whatever was coming already knew everything about me. At 3:30, the lights went out. Not a power outage, just my apartment, plunging into darkness while the hallway light still glowed under my door. Someone had cut the power to my unit specifically. Someone with access to the building's electrical system. Someone who'd been planning this for longer than I'd known they existed. I gripped the bat, my eyes adjusting to the blackness. The streetlight outside cast thin stripes through the blinds, just enough to see shapes, the couch, the door, the shadow of my own hands. My phone lit up. Final message. 3:47. The door handle turned, not from outside, from inside. The handle on my bedroom door, the one I'd been watching all night, rotated slowly in the darkness. They were already in the apartment, had been the whole time. While I was fortifying the front door, while I was sitting on my couch feeling prepared, they'd been waiting in my bedroom, patient, silent, watching me through a crack in the door. The bedroom door swung open. I couldn't see them clearly, just shapes, 2 of them, just like I'd heard on the recording. They moved without sound, gliding across the floor like shadows given form. I swung the bat, felt it connect with something solid, heard a grunt of pain. The pepper spray was in my other hand. I sprayed blind, heard a scream, felt hands grabbing at me in the darkness. I kicked, thrashed, fought with everything I had. The bat connected again. Someone fell, then hands closed around my throat. Strong hands, cold hands, squeezing until my vision sparked. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything except claw at the fingers digging into my windpipe. The world was shrinking to a single point of desperate, airless panic, a voice in my ear, calm despite the chaos. We always win, Audrey. That's what you don't understand. We've done this so many times. We know every move you'll make before you make it. The pressure increased. Black spots bloomed across my vision. But you fought harder than most. I respect that. I'll remember you. I was dying. I could feel it. The slowing of my heart, the fading of sensation, the darkness rushing up to swallow me whole. I had one chance left, one desperate, stupid chance. The prepaid phone was in my pocket. I dialed 911 before the lights went out, left the line open, hoping someone was listening, hoping someone would come. Sirens, distant but growing closer. The hands around my throat loosened. Just for a moment, just a flicker of uncertainty. And in that moment, I drove my thumb into the eye of whoever was holding me. The scream that followed was inhuman. The grip vanished. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, choking, alive. The sirens were close now, red and blue lights flickering through the blinds. The shapes in my apartment were moving toward the window, the one I'd checked, the one that was locked, the one that was now somehow open, cold night air rushing in. "This isn't over," one of them hissed. I still couldn't see their face, just a silhouette against the window. "We found you once. We'll find you again." Then they were gone. Out the window, onto a fire escape that hadn't existed when I'd moved in. A fire escape that I would later learn had been installed 3 weeks ago, during routine maintenance, by workers no one in the building could identify. The police found me on the floor, throat bruised, apartment destroyed, no evidence of intruders except a single bloody handprint on my bedroom wall. They also found something in my closet. A small camera, wireless, hidden in the ceiling vent. It had been there for months, according to the dust around its edges, recording everything, watching me sleep, change, live my life in what I'd thought was privacy. The camera's memory card was empty. They'd taken everything with them, but they'd left something behind, tucked into the vent beside where the camera had been. A list, 7 names, 7 addresses, 6 of them crossed out. The 7th name was mine, and at the bottom of the list, in that same neat handwriting, "We'll be in touch." The investigation lasted 3 months. Detectives who'd initially dismissed me as paranoid suddenly became very interested when they found the camera, the list, the evidence of an operation that had been running in my building long before I moved in. They identified the 6 other women. 4 of them were missing, vanished over the past 3 years, cases gone cold, families left with nothing but questions. One had died in what was ruled an accidental drowning, though her sister insisted she'd been afraid of water her whole life. The 6th had survived, like me. She'd moved to another state, changed her name, refused to speak to investigators. I understood why. Some things you can't talk about without breaking apart. The fire escape had been installed by a company that didn't exist, using permits that had been forged. The camera in my ceiling was military grade, the kind of equipment that costs thousands of dollars and requires expertise to install. These weren't random predators picking targets of opportunity. This was infrastructure. This was planning on a scale that made my skin crawl every time I thought about it. The police never found them, never identified them, never came close as far as I could tell. The bloody handprint on my wall matched no one in any database. The camera's serial number had been filed off. Every lead dissolved into dead ends and encrypted files, and the maddening sense that whoever they were, they'd been doing this long enough to know exactly how to disappear. I moved, of course, left the city entirely, found a small town 3 states away where no one knew my name. The apartment I chose was on the ground floor this time. I wanted exits, wanted options, wanted to never again be trapped 3 stories up with someone standing in my bedroom doorway. I don't turn my phone off anymore. I can't. The thought of waking up to another impossible voicemail, another message that shouldn't exist, makes my hands shake. So I sleep with it face down on the nightstand, ringer on, notifications enabled. Every buzz makes my heart stutter. Every unknown number sends me spiraling into 15 minutes of panic. But no messages have come. Not yet. It's been almost a year, and they haven't contacted me again. I want to believe that means it's over, that I fought hard enough, made enough noise, became too risky to pursue. But I know better. I've read about predators like this, studied them in the months since that night. They're patient. They play long games. They wait until you've almost convinced yourself you're safe, until you've just started to relax, and then they remind you that they never forgot. We'll be in touch. I think about those words every day. Think about what they mean, what they promise. Are they watching me now, in this new town, this new apartment? Have they installed cameras I haven't found yet? Are they studying my routines, learning my patterns, preparing for another 3:47 a.m.? I don't know. That's the worst part. I'll never know. Not really. Not until it's too late. I found the other survivor, the 6th woman on the list, the one who'd changed her name and refused to talk. It took months of careful searching, of messages left with family members, of promises that I just wanted to understand. Eventually, she called me from a blocked number. "You want to know how I survive?" she asked. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of someone who'd cut away everything soft inside themselves. I assume they're always watching. Every room, every phone call, every moment of every day. I live like I'm on camera because I probably am. And I never, ever let myself forget what they are. What are they? A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Collectors. That's what I call them. They don't want money, don't want anything normal. They want us, our fear, our privacy, our sense of safety. They feed on it. They take everything that makes a life feel like your own, and they hollow you out until there's nothing left. But you're still here. You survived. Did I? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I exist. I function. I go through the motions of being alive. But the person I was before they found me, she's gone. They took her, piece by piece, night after night. What's left is just what's left. She hung up before I could respond. I haven't been able to reach her since. Some nights, I wonder if she was right. If surviving this means losing the person I used to be. I'm not the same Audrey who moved into that apartment, who valued her solitude, who felt safe in the dark. That Audrey died in her bedroom at 3:47 a.m., hands around her throat, gasping for air that wouldn't come. What's walking around now is someone else, someone harder, someone who checks corners and counts exits and never quite relaxes, even in sleep. But I'm still here. That has to count for something. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. We live in a world where privacy is an illusion, where cameras can be hidden in ceiling vents, and phones can receive calls they shouldn't receive, and someone can stand over your bed at night while you sleep, breathing into the darkness, watching, waiting. Check your smoke detectors, check your vents, check every device that connects to a network, every appliance with a camera, every inch of the space you think belongs to you. Because it might not. Because someone might be watching right now, learning your patterns, adding your name to a list. And if you ever wake up to a voicemail you don't remember receiving, a timestamp that shouldn't exist, breathing on the other end, a whisper that knows your name, don't ignore it. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Don't wait for them to make the next move. Run, fight, scream until someone listens. Because they're out there, the collectors, the watchers, the ones who turn ordinary apartments into hunting grounds and ordinary women into prey. I survived them once. I don't know if I'll survive them again, but every morning I wake up is a morning they haven't won. Every night I make it through is another night. I'm still myself, still fighting, still refusing to be hollowed out. My phone buzzes sometimes in the early hours. Wrong numbers, spam calls, nothing that matters. I check each one anyway, heart pounding, waiting for the message that will tell me they found me again. It hasn't come yet, but it's always 3:47 somewhere. And I know, with a certainty that lives in my bones, that they're still out there, still watching, still waiting, still collecting. And someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, they'll be in touch. Story 3, the road sign that changed directions at night. I've driven Route 34 more times than I can count. It's the only road that connects Millbrook to the rest of civilization, a 40-mile stretch of two-lane blacktop cutting through pine forest and farmland, winding around hills that block cell service and past houses that went dark decades ago. During the day, it's almost pretty. The kind of scenic route you'd see on a postcard, all dappled sunlight and autumn colors. At night, it's something else entirely. My name is Dean. I'm 34, divorced, working as a delivery driver for a medical supply company. The job means long hours and lonely roads, but the pay is decent and nobody bothers me. After 15 years of customer service jobs, where I had to smile at people who treated me like furniture, the solitude feels like a gift. Just me and the radio, and the yellow lines disappearing under my headlights. I'd been making the Millbrook run for almost 2 years when I first noticed the sign. It was a standard route marker, green rectangle, white letters, the kind you see 1,000 times without really seeing. Dunford 12, it said, with an arrow pointing left. Dunford was a small town about a dozen miles off the main route, the kind of place you'd never visit unless you had a reason. I'd never had a reason, but that night, driving home around 11 p.m. after a late delivery, I could have sworn the arrow was pointing right. I slowed down as I passed it, squinting through the windshield. The sign looked normal. Same green, same white, same faded edges from years of weather. But the arrow was definitely pointing right. I remembered it pointing left. I'd passed it hundreds of times, always noting the left turn toward Dunford, never taking it. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe the sign had always pointed right, and I'd been confusing it with another marker somewhere else on the route. Memory plays tricks, especially on long drives, especially late at night. I kept driving, made it home around midnight, fell into bed, didn't think about it again. Until the next week. Same route, same late night return. I was watching for the sign this time, some part of my brain still nagging at the wrongness I'd felt before. And there it was, coming up in my headlights. Dunford 12. Arrow pointing left, left, not right, left, the way I remembered it, the way it had always been. I pulled over, sat there on the shoulder with my hazards blinking, staring at the sign like it might explain itself. The arrow pointed left, clear as day, or clear as night, I suppose. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. The sign was pointing left, but last week it had been pointing right. I was certain of that now. Certain in the way you're certain of your own name, your own face, the layout of your childhood home. Something had changed. I got out of the truck and walked toward the sign. The night was cold, that deep autumn cold that seeps through your jacket and settles in your bones. The forest pressed close on both sides of the road, black and silent except for the distant hoot of an owl. My footsteps crunched on gravel. The sign looked old up close. The paint was faded, the metal edges pocked with rust, but there was no mechanism that would allow it to rotate, no hinge or pivot point. It was just a sign, bolted to a post, pointing left toward Dunford. I took a picture with my phone, checked the timestamp, 11:47 p.m., October 14th. Then I got back in my truck and drove home, feeling foolish but also unsettled in a way I couldn't quite name. The next morning, I looked at the picture. The sign was there, clear and sharp, arrow pointing left. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. But I also couldn't shake the memory of that arrow pointing right. I started watching for the sign every time I drove the route. Day runs, night runs, it didn't matter. I noted the direction of the arrow, the condition of the post, the exact position where the road curved away toward Dunford. During the day, it always pointed left, always. But at night, sometimes it didn't. It took 3 more weeks to catch it. I was driving the late shift again, 11 p.m., the road empty and dark ahead of me. And there was the sign, emerging from the blackness like it had been waiting. Dunford 12, arrow pointing right. I slammed on the brakes, pulled over so fast my tires skidded on the asphalt. Grabbed my phone and took another picture, hands shaking. The timestamp read 11:52 p.m., November 3rd. I got out of the truck, walked to the sign, touched it, felt the cold metal under my fingers, the rough texture of the paint. The arrow was pointing right. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't confused. The sign had changed. I stood there for a long time, breath fogging in the cold air, trying to understand. Signs don't change direction. They don't rotate in the night when no one's looking. This was impossible. And yet here I was, staring at proof that impossible things happen anyway. Then I heard something. A car engine. distant but approaching, coming not from the main road, but from the direction the sign was pointing, from the right, from wherever the arrow was trying to lead people. Headlights appeared through the trees, bouncing and weaving like the car was moving fast on a rough road, too fast. The engine roared, high and desperate, the sound of someone running from something rather than driving toward something. The car burst onto Route 34, about 50 yards ahead of me. An old sedan, paint job I couldn't make out in the dark. It barely slowed at the intersection, just swung onto the main road, tires screaming, and accelerated away toward Millbrook. As it passed, I saw the driver's face for just a moment, lit by my truck's headlights. A woman, middle-aged, hair wild, eyes wide with terror. Her mouth was open, and I think she was screaming, though I couldn't hear it over her engine. Then she was gone, tail lights shrinking into the darkness. I looked back at the sign. The arrow was pointing left again. Left, toward Dunford, like it had always been, like nothing had happened at all. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in my kitchen with the lights on, looking at the two photographs on my phone, the sign pointing left, the sign pointing right, and trying to figure out what the hell I'd just witnessed, and wondering what that woman had seen at the end of the road the sign had tried to make her take. I tried to find her, the woman in the sedan, the one with terror written across her face. I figured she'd go to the police, file a report, tell someone what had happened on whatever road she'd escaped from. But when I called the Millbrook Sheriff's Office the next day, they had no record of any incident, no accidents reported on Route 34, no distressed woman coming in to make a statement. Nothing. "You sure you saw what you think you saw?" the deputy asked. His voice had that patient condescension reserved for people wasting his time. It was late, dark road, easy to imagine things. I hung up without answering. I knew what I'd seen. I had pictures, but the pictures didn't show what I needed them to show. They proved the sign changed direction, one pointing left, one pointing right, timestamps 3 weeks apart. What they didn't prove was why. What they didn't explain was the woman, or the terror in her eyes, or the road she'd come screaming out of like something was chasing her. I needed to know more. The county records office was a squat brick building in the Millbrook town center, staffed by a woman named Dolores, who looked like she'd been filing paperwork since before I was born. I told her I was researching local roads for a history project, which wasn't entirely a lie. She seemed pleased to have something to do. "Route 34's been there since the 20s, she said, pulling out a thick folder of yellowed documents. Used to be a logging road before they paved it. Dunford Road, that's the turnoff you're asking about. That's even older. Goes back to the original settlement. What's out there, at the end of Dunford Road?" Dolores's expression flickered, just for a moment, a shadow crossing her face. Then she shrugged, businesslike again. "Nothing much. Some old farms, mostly abandoned. The Dunford family homestead. That's where the road got its name. Been empty for decades." "Why'd everyone leave?" Another flicker. She busied herself straightening papers that didn't need straightening. "People move on. Town like Dunford. No jobs, no future. Young folks leave, old folks die. Story as old as the hills." She was lying. Or at least not telling the whole truth. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the way her hands moved too quickly over the documents. But I didn't push. I thanked her, took copies of the maps she'd shown me, and left. That night, I drove Route 34 again, parked a quarter-mile before the sign and walked the rest of the way, flashlight in hand, watching the darkness between the trees. The road was silent except for my footsteps and the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. The sign was pointing left, arrow toward Dunford, same as always. I stood there for almost an hour, watching it, waiting for it to change. It didn't. Whatever mechanism made it switch, If there was a mechanism, if this was even something that could be explained, it wasn't performing for me tonight. I walked back to my truck, frustrated and cold, but as I was pulling away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The sign was pointing right. I slammed on the brakes. Looked again. Right. The arrow was definitely pointing right now, toward whatever lay in that direction, toward the place the woman had fled from. I sat there, engine idling, heart pounding. The smart thing would be to drive away, go home. Forget I ever noticed that the sign changed. But I kept thinking about that woman's face, the terror, the screaming. What if there were others? What if the sign was leading people somewhere they shouldn't go, and I was the only one who'd noticed? I turned the truck around. The road to the right wasn't on any map I'd seen. It should have been. It was wide enough for 2 cars, paved at some point, though the asphalt had crumbled to gravel in places. But when I'd looked at the county records, there was nothing there, just unbroken forest where this road clearly existed. I drove slowly, headlights cutting through the dark, trees pressing close on both sides. The road curved and twisted, climbing gradually into the hills. No houses, no lights, no signs of life at all. After about 3 miles, I found the car. It was pulled off to the side of the road, driver's door hanging open, interior light still on. A blue sedan, mid-90s model, coated in dust like it had been sitting there for weeks. But the battery was still strong enough to power the dome light, which meant it couldn't have been there that long. I pulled up behind it, got out. The night was absolutely silent. No owls now, no rustling in the brush. Just dead, empty quiet. Hello? My voice sounded wrong in that silence, too loud, too alive. No answer. The car was empty. Keys still in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat, a half-empty coffee cup in the holder. Whoever had been driving had left in a hurry, left everything behind and ran into the woods, or been taken. I found the first shoe about 20 feet from the car, a woman's flat, black, lying in the middle of the road like it had fallen off mid-stride. The second shoe was another 30 feet ahead, at the edge of where my headlights reached. And beyond that, just barely visible in the darkness, something was standing in the road. I couldn't make out details, just a shape. Tall, thin, motionless. It could have been a person, it could have been a tree, or a shadow, or a trick of the light. But something about the proportions was wrong. The limbs too long, the posture too still. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, flashlight pointed at the ground, staring at the shape that might have been staring back at me. Then it moved. Not like a person moves. More like a stop-motion animation, jerky and wrong, covering distance without seeming to walk. One moment it was at the edge of visibility. The next, it was 20 feet closer. I ran. Threw myself into my truck, slammed the door, gunned the engine. Gravel sprayed as I reversed, not daring to take my eyes off the rearview mirror. The shape was still there, still moving, getting closer with each stuttering lurch. I spun the truck around and floored it. Didn't look back. Didn't slow down until I hit Route 34, until I saw the sign, pointing left again, innocent and ordinary, until I was 10 miles away and my hands had stopped shaking enough to grip the wheel properly. I didn't go back that night. But I knew, with a certainty that sat like ice in my stomach, that I'd have to. Because whoever had been driving that blue sedan was still out there, and so was the thing I'd seen in the road. I reported the abandoned car to the sheriff's office the next morning. Told them I'd seen it while driving, didn't mention the road that wasn't on any map, didn't mention the shape in the darkness. Just said there was a vehicle with the door open and personal effects inside. Looked like someone might be in trouble. They sent a deputy to check it out. He called me back 2 hours later, sounding annoyed. "There's no car out there, sir. No road either. Just woods. You sure you got the location right?" I was sure. I'd marked it on my GPS, noted the exact mileage from the Route 34 junction. But I told him I must have been mistaken, thanked him for his time, hung up. The road had been there. The car had been there. I touched the door handle, felt the cold metal under my fingers. But somehow, in the light of day, it had all vanished, or been hidden by whatever wanted it hidden. I went back to Dolores. This time I didn't pretend I was working on a history project. I sat across from her desk and told her what I'd seen. The sign that changed direction, the road that appeared at night, the car, the shoes, the thing in the darkness. I watched her face as I spoke, watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her hands start to tremble. "You went down that road," she whispered. "At night. And you came back." "What's out there, Dolores? What happened to Dunford?" She was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a car passed on the street, ordinary life continuing while we sat in the shadow of something neither of us wanted to name. "My grandmother used to tell stories," she finally said, "about the old days before the highway, when Dunford was a real town with real people. They were logging folk, mostly, hard workers, God-fearing, but something lived in those woods, something that had been there long before people came and didn't like being disturbed." "What kind of something?" She never said exactly, just called it the Hollow, said it was hungry, not for food, but for people, for their fear, their confusion, their final moments. It would lure travelers off the main roads, lead them deep into the forest where no one would hear them scream. Dolores's voice had gone flat, reciting words she'd heard so many times they'd lost their power to frighten her. Almost. The Dunford family tried to appease it, made deals, left offerings. For a while it worked. The town survived. What changed? The highway came through, Route 34. Suddenly there were strangers passing through every day, people who didn't know the old ways, didn't know to stay on the main road after dark. She looked at me, and her eyes were old, so much older than her face. The Hollow didn't need offerings anymore. It had all the prey it could want. "The sign," I said. "The sign that points the wrong direction. It's a lure. Has been for decades. It only changes at night, only when someone's alone, only when the Hollow is hungry. It leads them down that road, and they never come back." She shook her head. "Except you. You came back. That's never happened before." I thought about the shape in the darkness, the stuttering movement, the wrong proportions. I thought about how I'd run, how close it had been when I'd finally reached my truck, if I'd been a few seconds slower. "The woman in the sedan," I said. "A few weeks ago, I saw her escape. She made it back to Route 34. Dolores frowned. "A woman escaped?" Middle-aged, dark hair. She was driving an old sedan, looked terrified. She turned onto the main road and headed toward Millbrook. Nobody's come forward. Nobody's reported anything. Dolores's frown deepened. "Are you sure she made it? Are you sure what you saw was really her escaping?" The question hit me like cold water. I'd assumed she'd gotten away because I'd seen her car on Route 34, seen her face as she passed me. But I hadn't followed her, hadn't checked, just watched her taillights disappear into the distance and assumed she was safe. What if she wasn't? That night, I drove Route 34 again. Not to the sign, not yet, but past it, toward Millbrook, looking for any trace of the old sedan. I didn't know what I expected to find. Skid marks, maybe. A car wrapped around a tree. Some evidence that she'd made it, or that she hadn't. I found her 6 miles from the junction. The sedan was in a ditch, nose down, windshield shattered. The door was open, the way it had been on the hidden road. The interior light was still on, battery somehow still holding a charge. She was still in the driver's seat. I approached slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The smell hit me first, something rotten, something wrong. Then I saw her face, and I understood why no one had reported anything. She hadn't escaped. She'd almost escaped. Made it to Route 34, made it past the sign, made it 6 miles toward safety. And then, her eyes were open. Her mouth was frozen in a scream that had never finished, and all across her skin, spreading like frost on a window, were thin black lines that pulsed faintly in the darkness. The hollow's mark, its claim. Whatever she'd seen on that road, it had followed her. Let her think she was free. And then, when hope was strongest, it had taken what it wanted. I stumbled backward. My foot caught on something, and I went down hard, flashlight spinning away across the asphalt. In the darkness, I heard something move. Not from the car, from behind me, from the direction of the sign. I scrambled for the flashlight, swung it toward the sound. The beam caught movement, that same stuttering wrong motion I'd seen before. The shape was there, closer than it had been on the hidden road, close enough that I could see details now. It had been human once, maybe. The proportions suggested limbs and a torso and a head, but everything was stretched, elongated, like taffy pulled too thin. The face was a smear of features, eyes and mouth in approximately the right places but lacking any expression, any humanity. It tilted its head, considering me, deciding something. Then it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed, not at me, behind me, toward Millbrook, toward home. "You got away once," the gesture seemed to say. "But I know where you live now. I know where you sleep." The shape dissolved, not disappeared, dissolved like smoke in a strong wind, scattering into the darkness until nothing remained but the empty road and the dead woman in the car and my own ragged breathing. I drove home with every light in the cab on, checking my mirrors every few seconds, waiting for something to appear in the back seat. Nothing did. But when I got to my apartment and checked my phone, there was a notification waiting, a voicemail, received at 3:47 a.m. from my own number. I pressed play, breathing, slow and wet, and then a whisper, in a voice that sounded like wind through dead trees. "You should have stayed on the main road." I didn't sleep that night, sat in my living room with every light blazing, watching the windows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. My apartment was on the second floor of a complex in town, nowhere near Route 34, nowhere near the forest, surrounded by neighbors and streetlights and all the trappings of civilization. It should have felt safe. It didn't. The voicemail played on repeat in my head. That wet breathing, that voice like wind through dead branches. It had my number. It had called from my number, which meant it could reach me anywhere, could touch the technology I carried in my pocket every day, the rules I understood, physics, distance, the separation between the road and my home. None of them applied to this thing. Around 3 a.m., the lights flickered. Just once. Just a stutter, barely noticeable. But I was watching. I was waiting. And when they flickered again, I knew. It was here. I grabbed my keys, my phone, the baseball bat I'd bought after the first voicemail. I didn't know if any of it would help, but doing something felt better than waiting. The hallway outside my apartment was empty, the fluorescent lights humming their usual tune, normal, ordinary. The stairwell was dark. It shouldn't have been. There were emergency lights, backup systems, the kind of infrastructure that kept public spaces illuminated even during outages. But the stairwell was absolutely black, a rectangle of nothing where the door stood open. I could have gone back, could have locked my door, called the police, pretended this was a power failure and not something else entirely. But I thought about the woman in the sedan, how close she'd come to safety, how the hollow had let her run, let her hope, and then taken her anyway. If it was going to take me, I wasn't going to make it easy. I stepped into the darkness. The cold hit me immediately. That same bone-deep chill from the forest road, the temperature of places that had never known sunlight. I kept one hand on the wall, feeling my way down, bat raised in the other. Each step felt like a descent into something deeper than a stairwell, something older. 14 steps to the landing. Turn. 14 more to the ground floor. I counted them, focused on the numbers, tried not to think about what might be waiting in the black. The ground floor door was open. Beyond it, the lobby, and through the lobby's glass doors, the parking lot, my truck, escape. I was 3 steps from the exit when the lights came back on. The hollow was standing between me and the door. It looked different here in the fluorescent brightness of the lobby. More solid, more wrong. The stretched limbs cast shadows that didn't match their positions. The smeared face had developed features since the road. Eyes that were almost eyes. A mouth that was almost a mouth. Everything slightly off in ways that made my brain itch. You came back. Its voice wasn't the whisper from the voicemail. It was deeper, resonant, coming from everywhere at once. From the road, from the dark. No one comes back. I gripped the bat tighter. What do you want? What I've always wanted. It tilted that wrong head, studying me. Fear, confusion, the moment when hope dies and understanding begins. You've given me so much already, Dean. The way you've been searching, questioning, driving that road night after night. Delicious. The woman, the others, you killed them. I consumed them. There's a difference. It took a step closer, and the lights flickered again. But you're different. You looked into the dark and you didn't freeze. You ran, but you came back. You found the truth, and instead of hiding from it, you kept digging. The almost mouth stretched into something like a smile. I haven't had a challenge in so long. It was playing with me, the same way it had played with the woman in the sedan, letting her believe she'd escaped. I could see it now, the cat and mouse pleasure it took in the hunt, the way it fed on the journey as much as the destination. So what now? I asked. You chase me. Let me get close to safety, then pull me back. That's the game. That's always been the game. It took another step. The shadows on the wall writhed. Run, Dean. Give me something to savor. I didn't run. I swung the bat. It connected with something. I felt the impact travel up my arms, heard a sound like breaking glass. The hollow recoiled, more surprised than hurt, that smeared face contorting into something like anger. That was unwise. Probably. I swung again, drove it back another step. The bat felt warm in my hands now, almost hot, like friction was building with every impact. But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. You want fear? You want confusion? Find someone else. The hollow screamed. Not a human sound, something older, rawer, a frequency that vibrated in my teeth and made my vision blur. It lunged forward, those elongated arms reaching, fingers like branches scraping toward my face. I dropped the bat, grabbed the door handle behind me, threw myself backward into the parking lot, into the cold night air, into the space between the building and my truck. The hollow hit the doorway and stopped. It pressed against the threshold like it had hit a wall, that stretched body straining forward, those almost eyes burning with something between hunger and fury. But it couldn't cross. Something about the boundary, the door, the outside, the liminal space between inside and out, was holding it back. You can't run forever, it hissed. Every road leads to me eventually. Every dark place, every lonely stretch, every moment when you're alone and afraid. I'll be waiting. Maybe. I was backing toward my truck, not taking my eyes off it. But not tonight. I got in the truck, started the engine. The hollow watched me from the doorway, that wrong face pressed against an invisible barrier, those almost hands splayed against nothing. I drove, not toward Route 34, not toward the forest or the sign or any of the places it had marked as its territory. I drove toward the center of town, toward lights and people, and the kind of crowded, chaotic humanity that the hollow couldn't touch. I drove until dawn broke over the horizon, and the shadows retreated, and the world became ordinary again. But I knew it wasn't over. The hollow was old, patient. It had been hunting travelers on Route 34 for longer than anyone could remember, and it would keep hunting long after I was gone. I'd survived one night. That didn't mean I'd survive the next. I needed to find a way to stop it. Not just escape, stop it permanently, so no one else would follow that sign down a road that didn't exist and find themselves face to face with something that fed on their final moments. I went back to Dolores the next morning. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. "You're still alive," she said. "For now." I sat down across from her desk. "You said the Dunford family made deals with it, left offerings. Tell me everything you know about how they kept it contained." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a leather journal, cracked and faded with age. "My grandmother's," she said. "I've never shown this to anyone, but if you're serious about fighting that thing," she pushed the journal across the desk. "This is everything. The old ways, the old words, the price they paid to keep the hollow in the woods." I took the journal. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with decades of secrets and sacrifice. "What was the price?" I asked. Dolores's face went pale. "Blood," she whispered. "The Dunfords paid in blood, and when the blood ran out, the hollow came looking for more." The journal took me 3 days to read. The handwriting was cramped and archaic, the language formal in ways that made my head hurt. But the story it told was clear enough once I learned to parse the old-fashioned phrasing. The hollow had been in those woods since before memory. The first settlers had found it waiting, a presence in the darkness, a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. They'd tried to fight it at first, lost a dozen men and women to its appetite. Then, a woman named Esther Dunford had made a different choice. She'd gone into the forest alone, unarmed, and offered a deal. The hollow would stay in the deep woods, away from the settlement, away from the roads. In exchange, the Dunfords would bring it offerings, travelers who wandered too close, drifters who wouldn't be missed, the occasional sacrifice drawn from their own bloodline when times were lean. One life for many. A terrible arithmetic, but one that kept the town alive. For almost a century, the arrangement held. The Dunfords maintained the boundary, performed the rituals, fed the hollow just enough to keep it contained. The sign on Route 34 was part of it, a marker that could be turned, pointing travelers toward the offering road when the hollow grew hungry. A lure controlled by human hands. But the last Dunford had died in 1987. No children, no heirs, no one to maintain the old bargain. The sign still turned, but now it moved on its own, following hungers that had no human restraint. The hollow had been feeding freely for almost 40 years, taking whoever the road delivered. The journal included instructions, rituals that could reinforce the boundary, words that could push the hollow back into the deep forest, methods for containing something that should never have been allowed to roam. But every ritual required the same thing: blood, freely given, from someone willing to take up the Dunford burden. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. The smart thing would be to leave, pack up my life, move somewhere far from Route 34, let the hollow be someone else's problem. I had no connection to this place, no obligation to its people. I was just a delivery driver who'd noticed a sign pointing the wrong direction. But I kept thinking about the woman in the sedan, the terror in her eyes, the black lines spreading across her skin as the hollow claimed what it was owed. I kept thinking about all the others, the missing persons, the cold cases, the empty spaces where people used to be. How many more would there be if I walked away? I went back to Dolores one more time. "I need to know where the boundary is," I said. "The edge of its territory, the place where the old rituals were performed." She didn't ask why. Maybe she already knew. She drew me a map, marking locations with an X, the original Dunford homestead, the standing stones deeper in the forest, the crossroads where the Offering Road met the real one. Then she took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. "You don't have to do this," she said. "The Dunfords chose their path. You can choose differently." "Can I?" I looked at the map, at the marks she'd made, at the weight of responsibility I'd never asked for. If I leave, it keeps hunting. More people die. More families never know what happened to someone they loved. I shook my head. I've spent my whole life avoiding things, Dolores. Avoiding commitment, avoiding risk, avoiding anything that might hurt. Maybe it's time I stopped running. The ritual took place on a moonless night at the crossroads where the Offering Road met Route 34. I'd memorized the words from the journal, gathered the materials Esther Dunford had listed: salt, iron, ash from a fire that had burned for 7 days, and a knife sharp enough to draw blood without hesitation. I won't describe what happened in detail. Some things shouldn't be written down, shouldn't be spoken aloud, shouldn't exist in any form that could be repeated. But I can tell you this: the hollow came when I called it, rose up from the darkness like a tide that stretched in wrong shape, towering over me, those almost eyes burning with something between hunger and recognition. "You return," it said, "freely, willingly." I return with terms. I held up the knife, let the blade catch what little light existed. The old bargain, the Dunford pact. I'm here to renew it. The hollow laughed, a sound like branches breaking, like bones snapping, like everything fragile giving way at once. "You think you can bind me, one man, alone, with words from a dead woman's book? I think you're tired." I kept my voice steady, though my hands wanted to shake. Tired of hunting, tired of chasing, tired of prey that runs and screams and never understands what's happening. The old arrangement worked for you. Regular meals, no effort required. All you had to do was stay in the woods and wait. The almost eyes narrowed. It was listening. "I'm offering you that again. A boundary you won't cross. A road that stays pointed where it should. And in exchange..." I drew the knife across my palm, let the blood drip onto the crossroads. A promise, kept in blood, renewed every year, for as long as I live. The hollow was silent for a long time. The darkness pressed close, thick and hungry. I could feel it considering, weighing, deciding whether to accept my offer or simply take what it wanted. Then it smiled, that wrong, stretched smile, and nodded. "Agreed." The binding took hold, like chains wrapping around something vast and ancient. I felt it in my bones, in my blood, in the part of me that would now be connected to this creature for the rest of my life. The hollow retreated into the forest, into the deep places where sunlight never reached. The sign on Route 34 stopped turning. That was 2 years ago. I still drive the route, still make deliveries to Millbrook and beyond. But now I also maintain the boundary, perform the rituals, keep the old bargain alive. Once a year, at the crossroads, I open a vein and let the blood fall. It's not much, a few ounces, a moment of pain, a small price for the lives it saves. The sign points left now, always left, toward the real Dunford, toward roads that lead where they're supposed to. I check it every time I pass, watching for any sign that the hollow is testing its chains. So far, it's held, but I know it's still out there, waiting in the darkness, hungry as ever, patient as stone. If I die without an heir, without someone to take up the burden, it will be free again. The sign will turn, the road will open, and the hollow will feed. If you ever drive Route 34, if you ever pass a sign that seems to point the wrong direction toward a road that doesn't appear on any map, keep driving. Stay on the main road. Don't let curiosity pull you into the dark. Some bargains are worth keeping, and some roads should never be traveled at all. Story 4, The Co-Worker, still on the schedule months after disappearing. Marcus Weber vanished on a Thursday in March, clocked out at 11:47 p.m., walked to his car in the employee lot, and was never seen again. His Honda was still there the next morning, doors locked, keys missing, no sign of struggle. The police treated it as a missing persons case for about 2 weeks before the leads dried up and other priorities took over. His family put up flyers. His friends posted on social media. The company sent a memo expressing concern and reminding everyone to walk to their cars in pairs. 3 months later, his name was still on the schedule. I noticed it the first week of June when I was checking my shifts in the break room. The printout was pinned to the corkboard like always, organized by department, night shift on the left and day shift on the right. And there, in the warehouse section, slotted into the Tuesday overnight, Marcus Weber. I assumed it was a mistake. Our scheduling software was ancient, the kind of system that crashed if you looked at it wrong. HR was perpetually understaffed and overworked. Someone had probably just forgotten to remove him from the rotation. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Linda, who sighed and said she'd put in a ticket. But the next week, he was on the schedule again, Tuesday overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., same as always. My name is Jared. I'm 28, and I've worked at the Colton Distribution Center for almost 4 years. It's a massive building, 500,000 square feet of concrete and steel, stuffed with shelving units that stretch toward the ceiling like metal trees. We process orders for a regional grocery chain, pulling items off shelves and loading them onto trucks that leave before dawn. The work is repetitive and physical, the kind of job that leaves you too tired to think, which is exactly what I needed after my life fell apart a few years back. Marcus and I had been friendly, if not exactly friends. We'd worked the same shift, taken breaks together, complained about management in the way everyone complains about management. He was a few years older than me, quiet, the kind of guy who did his job without drama and went home to a life he never talked about. When he disappeared, I felt the loss, the way you feel the absence of a familiar piece of furniture. Not grief exactly, but a sense that something was missing from the landscape. I didn't think about him much after the first few weeks. That's the thing about loss. It fades, even when you don't want it to. The flyers came down, the social media posts stopped. Life at the distribution center returned to normal, and Marcus became a story we told new hires. Yeah, a guy vanished from the parking lot a few months back. Weird, right? Anyway, here's how the pallet jack works. But then, his name kept appearing on the schedule. By the third week, I'd mentioned it to Linda 4 times. Each time, she promised to fix it. Each time, the next schedule came out with Marcus Weber printed in the same slot. Tuesday overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., like he was coming back, like he'd never left. Maybe the system just can't delete him, my co-worker Priya suggested. We were on break, sitting in the windowless room with its flickering fluorescent lights and vending machines that hadn't been restocked since February. Some kind of glitch. You know how this place is with technology. Then why is he only on Tuesdays? If it was a glitch, wouldn't he show up everywhere? Priya shrugged. She didn't have an answer. Neither did I. The Tuesday after that conversation, I worked the overnight shift. I wasn't scheduled with Marcus. No one was, because Marcus didn't exist anymore. But I found myself watching the time clock anyway. 10 p.m. came and went. No one punched in under his name. The warehouse hummed with the usual sounds. Forklifts beeping, conveyor belts rattling, the distant voices of the crew working the loading dock. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Went to my section, started pulling orders, tried to forget about the dead man on the schedule. Around 2 a.m., I needed to grab supplies from the back storage area. It's the oldest part of the building, a maze of high shelves and narrow aisles that the overhead lights don't quite reach. Most people avoided it at night. Too many shadows, too many corners where you couldn't see what was coming. But I needed packing tape, and the supply closet was back there, so I went. The shelves rose up around me like canyon walls. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, unnaturally loud in the silence. warehouse was never quiet. Always some machine running, some person moving. But back here, the sound didn't carry. It was like stepping into a different building entirely. I found the supply closet, grabbed what I needed, turned to leave, and saw the clipboard. It was hanging on a hook by the closet door, the kind we used for inventory counts. I almost walked past it, but something made me stop, made me look. The top sheet was a task list. The handwriting was familiar, neat, precise, slightly slanted to the left. Marcus's handwriting. I'd seen it 100 times on packing slips and break room sign-ups. I knew it the way you know a co-worker's voice or the sound of their footsteps. The date at the top was yesterday. I stood there, tape in hand, staring at a task list written by a man who'd been missing for 3 months. The items were mundane: inventory counts, shelf organization, the kind of busy work we all did during slow periods. But each one was checked off, completed, initialed with the same looping MW that Marcus had always used. Someone was doing his work. Someone with his handwriting, his initials, his knowledge of the warehouse systems. Or Marcus was still here, still coming to work, still punching in, still walking these aisles while the rest of us assumed he was dead. I looked up from the clipboard. The shelves stretched away into darkness, row after row of shadows and silence. And somewhere in that darkness, so faint I almost missed it, I heard footsteps, not coming toward me, moving away, retreating deeper into the warehouse, into the parts of the building no one ever went. I should have followed, should have called out, demanded to know who was there. But my legs wouldn't move, and my voice wouldn't come, and all I could do was stand there, holding a roll of packing tape, listening to the footsteps fade, listening to Marcus Weber walk away into the dark. I didn't tell anyone about the clipboard, didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, without inviting the kind of questions I couldn't answer. Instead, I took a picture of it with my phone, the task list, the handwriting, the date, and went back to my section like nothing had happened. But something had happened, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day, I pulled Marcus's employee file from the records room. Technically, I wasn't supposed to have access, but the lock on the filing cabinet had been broken for years, and nobody cared enough to fix it. I found his folder near the back, thin and unremarkable. Emergency contact, a sister in Delaware. Previous employment, a factory outside Pittsburgh. Start date, almost 5 years ago. And at the very back, a disciplinary note I'd never heard about. 3 weeks before he vanished, Marcus had been written up for unauthorized access to restricted areas. According to the report, he'd been found in the sub-basement after hours, a section of the building that was supposedly sealed off, used for storage of decommissioned equipment and old records. When asked what he was doing there, he'd refused to explain. The write-up had been signed by a supervisor who'd since transferred to another facility. I didn't even know we had a sub-basement. That night, I went looking for it. The distribution center was a sprawl of interconnected sections, some dating back to the 1960s, when the building had been a textile mill. Most of us only knew the main warehouse floor, the break room, the loading docks. But the building had layers, additions built on additions, wings that had been closed off when the company downsized. I found the access door behind a row of broken pallet jacks in the maintenance corridor. It was supposed to be locked. The disciplinary note mentioned security having to let Marcus out. But when I tried the handle, it turned easily. Someone had been through here recently. The dust on the floor was disturbed, marked with footprints leading down a narrow staircase. I followed them. The sub-basement was cold. Not just cool the way underground spaces get, but genuinely cold, the kind of temperature that shouldn't exist in June. The air smelled stale and metallic, like old machinery and something else underneath, something organic. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness. The space was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 100 feet square, lined with rusting shelves and stacked boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a dim, red glow. The footprints led toward the back wall. I followed them past shelving units full of obsolete equipment, past filing cabinets stuffed with yellowed paperwork, past a stack of old uniforms that crumbled when I brushed against them. The building's history was buried down here, layers of it, going back further than the distribution center, further than the textile mill, to something older. The footprints stopped at a door. It was metal, industrial, the kind of heavy fire door you'd expect in a building this old. But someone had painted something on it, symbols I didn't recognize, arranged in a circle around a single word. Keep, not keep out or keep closed, just keep, like a command, like a promise. I put my hand on the door. The metal was warm, not cold like everything else down here, but warm, almost body temperature. And underneath my palm, I felt something, a vibration, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat. I pulled back, stood there in the red-lit darkness, staring at that word, feeling the pulse that shouldn't exist. Then I heard footsteps above me. Someone was in the maintenance corridor, moving toward the stairs. I killed my flashlight, pressed myself against the nearest shelf, barely breathing, watching the stairwell entrance. A shape appeared at the top, tall, familiar, silhouetted against the dim light from above. Marcus Weber walked down the stairs. I knew it was him even before my eyes adjusted. The slope of his shoulders, the rhythm of his gait, the way he held his head slightly tilted to the left. 3 months missing, presumed dead, and here he was, descending into the sub-basement like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He didn't see me, didn't even look in my direction, just walked past, close enough that I could have reached out and touched him, and headed straight for the door with the painted symbols. He put his hand on the metal, stood there for a moment, head bowed, like he was listening to something. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here. I came back, just like I promised." The vibration in the door changed, grew stronger, faster, like whatever was behind it was responding to his presence. Marcus pressed his forehead against the metal, and I heard him make a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. I know. Soon. Just a little longer." He stayed like that for almost a minute. Then he straightened, turned, and walked back toward the stairs. His face passed through a patch of red light as he went, and I don't know how to describe what I saw. It was Marcus's face, the same features, the same structure, but the expression was wrong, empty, like something wearing a mask it hadn't quite learned to operate. And his eyes caught the light and reflected it back, just for an instant, in a color that human eyes shouldn't be. He climbed the stairs and disappeared. I stayed pressed against that shelf for a long time, shaking, trying to process what I'd witnessed. Marcus was alive. Marcus was coming to work, doing his tasks, visiting whatever was behind that door. But Marcus was also different, changed somehow, in ways that went deeper than 3 months of absence could explain. I should have left then, should have walked out of that building and never come back. But I needed to know what was behind the door, what he'd been talking to, what had him in its grip. I crossed to the door, put my hand where his had been. The vibration stopped. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. And then, from somewhere on the other side, a voice. Not Marcus's voice. Something older, deeper. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You're not the one we're waiting for." A pause. "But you'll do." The door began to open. I ran. Didn't think, didn't hesitate, just turned and sprinted for the stairs. Behind me, I heard the door swing wide, heard something that might have been laughter or might have been screaming, heard a rush of air that carried a smell like rotting flowers and copper. My feet hit the stairs and I climbed, 2 at a time, 3 at a time, until I burst through the maintenance corridor and slammed the door shut behind me. The handle rattled, once, twice, then stopped. I didn't wait to see if it would open. Just walked, fast, but not running. Nothing that would draw attention. Back to the main warehouse floor, back to my section, back to the normal world of conveyor belts and order slips and co-workers who had no idea what was underneath their feet. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I moved through it mechanically, pulling orders, stacking boxes, doing everything I was supposed to do while my mind churned through what I'd seen. Marcus was alive. Something was behind that door, and whatever it was, it knew I existed now. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. Spent 48 hours in my apartment, curtains drawn, trying to convince myself I'd imagined everything. Stress, exhaustion, the cumulative toll of too many overnight shifts. People hallucinated when they were tired enough. People saw things that weren't there. But I hadn't imagined the clipboard. Hadn't imagined Marcus walking past me close enough to touch. Hadn't imagined the voice that said you'll do with the casual certainty of something that had been waiting a very long time. On the third day, I went to see Marcus's sister. Her name was Ellen, and she lived in a small house on the outskirts of Wilmington. I'd found her through the emergency contact in Marcus's file, driven 4 hours without really knowing what I was going to say. She answered the door with the weary expression of someone who'd spent 3 months answering questions about her missing brother. "I worked with Marcus," I said, "at the distribution center. I think I might have information about what happened to him." She let me in. Made coffee neither of us drank. Sat across from me in a living room filled with photographs of a family that had already started to grieve. "The police gave up weeks ago," she said. "They think he's dead. They think someone grabbed him in the parking lot and will never find the body." Her voice was flat, practiced, like she'd said these words so many times they'd lost their meaning. "Do you know something different?" I told her. Not everything. Not the door, not the voice, not the eyes that reflected wrong, but enough. The schedule that kept his name, the clipboard with his handwriting, the footsteps in the dark. Ellen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to a bookshelf, and pulled down a shoebox that had been hidden behind a row of old paperbacks. "Marcus sent me this," she said. 2 weeks before he disappeared, told me to keep it safe, not to open it unless something happened to him." She set the box on the coffee table between us. "I opened it after the police stopped looking. I've been trying to understand it ever since." Inside the box were papers, photocopies mostly, of documents that looked old, hand-typed, faded, some of them in languages I didn't recognize. Marcus had organized them with sticky notes, his neat handwriting labeling each section. History, rituals, containment, feeding cycle. I picked up the first stack. The top page was a photocopy of a newspaper article from 1923 reporting on a fire at the Colton textile mill. 17 workers had died, trapped in the basement when the stairwell collapsed. But according to the article, the bodies were never recovered. The fire had been too intense, the structural damage too severe. The basement had been sealed rather than excavated. The next document was older, a handwritten letter dated 1891 from someone named Elias Colton to his business partner. The language was formal, difficult to parse, but certain phrases jumped out. The workers speak of something in the lower levels, a presence that whispers, that promises, that takes what it is owed. I have seen it myself. God help me, I have seen it, and I understand now why this land was empty when we bought it. We cannot destroy it. We can only contain it, keep it fed, keep it satisfied, keep the door closed at all costs. I looked up at Ellen. She was watching me, her face pale. "Marcus found all this in the company archives," she said. "He was obsessed with it. Called me every week with new theories about what was underneath that building. I thought he was losing his mind." Her voice cracked. Maybe he was, or maybe he found exactly what he was looking for. The last document in the box was a diagram, hand-drawn, precise, showing the layout of the sub-basement I'd visited. The door was marked with the same symbol I'd seen painted on the metal, and next to it, in Marcus's handwriting, it needs a keeper, someone to maintain the seal, to manage the feeding schedule, to keep it from breaking through. The last keeper died in 1987. It's been starving ever since. I think it's calling to me. I think it wants me to take the job. I thought about Marcus standing at that door, forehead pressed against the warm metal, whispering promises to whatever was on the other side. I thought about his face in the red light, the emptiness behind his eyes, the way he'd said just a little longer like he was counting down to something. He didn't disappear, I said slowly. He answered the call. He became the keeper. Then why is he still on the schedule? Ellen asked. If he's down there, doing whatever it wants, why does he keep coming back to work? I didn't have an answer, but I remembered what the voice had said, the casual hunger in those words. You're not the one we're waiting for, but you'll do. Maybe Marcus wasn't enough. Maybe whatever was behind that door needed more than one keeper. Maybe I was next on the list. My phone buzzed, a text from Priya back at the distribution center. Hey, weird question. Did you switch shifts? You're on the schedule for tomorrow night, Tuesday overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., right next to Marcus. I drove back that night. 4 hours on dark highways, Marcus's research spread across my passenger seat, every mile bringing me closer to something I should have been running from. Ellen had begged me not to go, had offered to call the police, the FBI, anyone who might listen. But I knew how that conversation would end. A presence in the basement, a missing man who still comes to work. Sir, have you considered speaking with a mental health professional? This was mine to deal with. Whatever was underneath the Colton distribution center had marked me, added my name to its schedule, started whatever process turned ordinary workers into keepers. If I didn't face it now, I'd spend the rest of my life waiting for it to come for me. The building was quiet when I arrived. Tuesday overnight meant a skeleton crew, maybe 15 people spread across 500,000 square feet. Too few to notice if someone slipped away to the maintenance corridor, to the stairs, to the door that shouldn't exist. I clocked in at 10 p.m., saw my name on the schedule next to Marcus's, printed there like it had always belonged. Priya waved to me from across the floor, relief on her face that I was back, that I was okay. I waved back and headed for my section. At midnight, I made my move. The maintenance corridor was empty. The door to the sub-basement was unlocked, just like before. I descended into the cold and the red emergency light, following the path I'd memorized, the path Marcus had walked so many times before me. He was waiting at the door, standing in that same position, forehead against the metal, hands pressed flat, communing with whatever lived on the other side. He didn't turn when I approached, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. Just stood there, breathing slowly, his body swaying slightly like a plant in a gentle wind. Marcus. No response. Marcus, I know you can hear me. I talked to Ellen. I read the documents you sent her. A pause in his breathing, then slowly he turned. His face was worse than before. The emptiness I'd seen had deepened, carved itself into his features until he barely looked human anymore. His skin was pale, almost translucent. His eyes were open, but they didn't focus on me. They looked through me at something I couldn't see. You came. His voice was flat, effectless, the voice of someone reading words off a script. It said you would. It's been waiting for you. What is it, Marcus? What's behind that door? Older than the building, older than the town. It was here when the first settlers arrived, and it'll be here when the last human dies. He smiled, and there was nothing human in that expression. It gets hungry, Jared. So hungry. The keepers feed it, keep it satisfied, keep it from breaking through. Feed it how? Fear at first, confusion, The feeling of being lost in a place you thought you knew. His head tilted. That familiar gesture made alien by the wrongness behind it. But that's not enough anymore. It's been starving for decades. It needs more. It needs keepers who will bring it what it really craves. Which is? Marcus stepped aside, revealing the door behind him. It was open now, not all the way, just a crack, darkness spilling through like liquid. And from that crack came a sound, breathing, slow and vast, the respiration of something too large to exist in any space I could imagine. Come see for yourself. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I thought about the schedule, about my name printed next to his, about all the workers who climbed into their cars every night, never knowing what lurked beneath their feet. If I ran now, I'd be running forever, and eventually it would catch me. I stepped forward, pushed the door wider, looked inside. I can't describe what I saw. The human brain isn't built for certain geometries, certain depths, certain kinds of hunger. What I can tell you is that it was alive in ways that made normal life seem like a pale imitation. It filled the space behind the door and somehow extended beyond it, folding through dimensions that shouldn't exist, watching me with attention that felt like weight. And it was beautiful. Terrible and beautiful, the way a hurricane is beautiful, the way a wildfire is beautiful. I understood, in that moment, why Marcus had answered its call, why anyone would. You came. The voice was in my head now, bypassing my ears entirely. It resonated in my bones, in my blood, in parts of me I didn't have names for. The other one is almost empty. I need fresh fear, fresh devotion, fresh life. I'm not here to serve you. Amusement, vast and ancient. They all say that, at first. But you felt it when you touched the door, the connection, the pull. You're already mine, Jared. You have been since the moment you read your name on the schedule. I looked at Marcus. He was watching me with something that might have been pity, might have been envy. It's easier if you don't fight, he said. The transition hurts less. What happens to the keepers when they're used up? Marcus's smile flickered. For just a moment, something like the man I'd known surfaced in his eyes. Tired, scared, trapped. We become part of it. Our memories, our fears, everything we were, absorbed, digested. The emptiness returned, swallowing that brief spark. It's not so bad. You stop being afraid eventually. You stop being anything. The thing behind the door pulsed. I felt it reaching for me, tendrils of attention wrapping around my mind, starting the process that would hollow me out and fill me with its purpose. And I let it, not because I'd given up, because I'd read Marcus's research on the drive back, because I knew something the entity didn't. The keepers weren't just servants, they were anchors. The seals that kept the door closed required human will, human intention, human choice. The entity couldn't break through on its own. It needed someone on this side to open the way, which meant a keeper who refused to open the door could keep it closed, permanently. I felt the connection forming, the entity's presence flooding into me. But instead of surrendering, I pushed back, focused on everything I wanted to protect, the workers upstairs, the families who'd never know what lived beneath them, every person who'd ever clocked in at Colton Distribution and walked out safely. The entity recoiled. Confusion, then rage, then something like fear. What are you doing? Taking the job, I said, on my terms. I grabbed the door and pulled it closed. The metal was burning hot now, searing my palms, but I didn't let go. I felt the entity throwing itself against the barrier, felt Marcus screaming somewhere behind me, felt the seal reforming stronger than it had been in decades. The door slammed shut, the symbols painted on the metal flared bright, then faded. The vibration stopped, the breathing stopped, everything stopped, leaving only silence and the smell of burned flesh and the unconscious body of Marcus Weber crumpled on the floor. I looked at my hands. The burns were already healing, new skin forming over the wounds, pink and strange. Part of me was different now. Part of me belonged to that door, would always belong to it. But the door was closed, and I was the one holding the key. Marcus woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed with no memory of the past 3 months. The doctors called it a fugue state, a psychological break that had caused him to wander, to hide, to live a shadow life in the margins of his own existence. His sister flew in from Delaware, wept at his bedside, took him home to recover. The police closed the case. The company sent flowers. I visited him once before he left. He looked at me with eyes that were human again, confused and frightened and blissfully unaware of what he'd become, what he'd almost cost the world. I told him I was glad he was okay. I didn't tell him anything else. Some doors are better left closed. Some memories are better left forgotten. I still work at Colton Distribution, still pull orders, stack boxes, make small talk with co-workers who have no idea what lies beneath their feet. The routines haven't changed. The shifts haven't changed. The only difference is the extra hour I spend in the sub-basement every Tuesday night, standing at the door, maintaining the seal that keeps something ancient and hungry from spilling into the world. The entity still speaks to me sometimes. I feel it pressing against the barrier, testing the edges, looking for weaknesses. It whispers promises in the dark, power, knowledge, freedom from every limitation that defines human existence. All I have to do is open the door. All I have to do is let it in. I don't listen. That's the job now. Hearing the whispers and choosing not to answer. My body has changed in ways I'm still learning to understand. The burns on my hands healed in hours, leaving no scars. I don't get tired the way I used to. I can work double shifts without feeling the strain, can go days without sleep if I need to. My senses are sharper, my reflexes faster, gifts from the connection, payment for the service I provide. But there are costs too. I don't dream anymore. When I close my eyes, I see the thing behind the door. Its vast, patient hunger, its endless appetite for fear and flesh and the quiet moments when humans feel most alone. I know its history now, the centuries of feeding, the generations of keepers who served and were consumed. That knowledge sits in my head like a stone, heavy and cold, impossible to forget. I've started keeping records. Everything Marcus discovered, everything I've learned since taking his place. I've documented it all, stored copies in safety deposit boxes and encrypted drives and sealed envelopes with instructions not to open unless I disappear. If something happens to me, someone else needs to know. Someone else needs to be ready to take the job. The schedule still shows Marcus's name sometimes. I've stopped trying to remove it. Maybe it's a glitch in the software. Maybe it's the entity's way of reminding me what happens to keepers who fail. Either way, I've learned to ignore it. There are more important things to focus on. Ellen calls me every few weeks. Marcus is doing better, she says. Back at work, seeing a therapist, slowly rebuilding the life he lost. He doesn't remember me, doesn't remember anything about Colton Distribution or the door in the sub-basement. The entity released him completely when I took over, severed whatever connection had been draining him hollow. He gets to be normal again. I envy him sometimes, miss the version of myself that didn't know what lurked beneath the ordinary world, that could walk through a warehouse at night without feeling the pulse of something ancient under my feet. But that version of me wouldn't have been able to do what needed to be done. That version would have run, and the door would have opened, and everything would be different now. Worse. Everything would be worse. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. The world is full of doors, not just the literal kind. The thresholds we cross every day without thinking, the boundaries between what we know and what we're afraid to discover. Most of those doors stay closed on their own, held shut by luck or habit, or the simple fact that nobody's looking for them. But some doors need keepers. Some doors need someone willing to stand in the dark, to hear the whispers, to say no when everything in them wants to say yes. It's not heroic work. It's not glamorous. Most of the time, it's just showing up for your shift and doing what needs to be done while everyone else goes home to lives they'll never know were saved. I used to think the schedule was a glitch, a software error that kept a dead man's name in the rotation long after he was gone. Now I understand it differently. The schedule wasn't wrong. It was waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to ask questions, waiting for the next keeper to find their way down the stairs and take their place at the door. Every workplace has its mysteries. The coworker who vanishes without explanation, the locked room nobody talks about, the strange sounds in the walls that management always blames on old pipes. Most of the time, there's a rational explanation. Most of the time, the world works the way we expect it to. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the schedule shows a name that shouldn't be there, and the only way to find out why is to follow the footsteps into the dark. I clocked in for my shift last night. Tuesday overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My name was on the schedule, right where it always is now. Right where it will be for as long as I can hold the door. And next to my name, in the same slot, a new entry had appeared. A name I didn't recognize. Someone who'd just been hired, according to HR. Someone who'd be starting next week. Someone the entity was already watching. I found her in the break room during orientation. A young woman with tired eyes and the look of someone who'd taken this job because she didn't have better options. I introduced myself, welcomed her to the team, told her if she ever saw anything strange, anything that didn't make sense, she should come to me first. She laughed, nervous, and asked what kind of strange things happened at a distribution center. I smiled and told her probably nothing, but I'll be watching, I'll be ready. And if her name starts appearing on the schedule when it shouldn't, if the entity decides it wants another keeper, another anchor, another hollow vessel to fill with its hunger, I'll be there to intervene. That's the job now, standing between the door and everyone who doesn't know it exists. Clocking in every Tuesday at 10 p.m., keeping the schedule that keeps the world from falling through. Story 5, the sound of footsteps in my kitchen at 4 a.m. The first time I heard them, I assumed it was my mother. She had dementia, the slow, creeping kind that stole pieces of her a little at a time. Some nights she wandered, moving through the house in a fog of confusion, looking for things that didn't exist anymore. A husband who'd died 15 years ago. A dog we'd put down when I was in high school. The kitchen of the house she'd grown up in, torn down before I was born. I'd find her standing in doorways, staring at nothing, asking questions I couldn't answer. So when I woke at 4 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the kitchen, I didn't panic. Just sighed, threw off the covers, and padded down the hall to guide her back to bed. The kitchen was empty. I stood in the doorway, blinking sleep from my eyes, listening. The house was silent now, that thick, heavy silence that only exists in the dead hours before dawn. No footsteps, no movement. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the clock in the living room. I checked on my mother. She was in her bed, exactly where I'd left her, breathing the slow, even breaths of deep sleep. She hadn't moved. I went back to bed, told myself I'd dreamed it. My name is Connor. I'm 29, and I moved back into my childhood home 8 months ago to take care of my mother after her diagnosis. It wasn't what I'd planned for my life. I'd had an apartment in the city, a job I didn't hate, the beginnings of something that might have become a real future. But when the doctors said she couldn't live alone anymore, there wasn't anyone else. My father was dead. My sister lived across the country with 3 kids and a husband who traveled for work. It was me or a facility, and I couldn't put her in a facility. Not yet. Not while she still knew my name. The house was old, built in the 1940s, added onto in the 70s, never quite updated enough to feel modern. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned. At night, when the temperature dropped, The whole structure seemed to contract, producing sounds that could easily be mistaken for footsteps if you weren't used to them. I was used to them. I'd grown up here. I knew the difference between the house settling and someone walking across the kitchen floor. The second time it happened was a week later. Same time, 4 a.m. exactly, according to the clock on my nightstand. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing from the back door to the refrigerator and stopping there. Not the random creaking of old boards. Something with rhythm, with purpose, with weight. I got up, checked the kitchen, empty. Checked my mother, asleep. Checked the back door, locked. Deadbolt engaged, chain still on. I stood in my kitchen in the dark, listening to nothing, and felt the first cold fingers of real unease wrap around my spine. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining things. Something had made those sounds, and it wasn't my mother, and it wasn't the house. I started setting my phone to record before bed, left it on the kitchen counter, microphone up, and let it run all night. The first few recordings captured nothing but ambient noise, the refrigerator cycling, a car passing on the street outside, my mother's coughing fit at 2 a.m. Normal sounds, explainable sounds. Then I caught it. 4:03 a.m. The recording was mostly silence, that dead air quality of a house at rest. And then, clearly, unmistakably, footsteps. 5 of them, maybe 6, crossing the kitchen floor. A pause. The sound of the refrigerator door opening. Another pause. The door closing. Footsteps retreating. I played it back 17 times. Turned up the volume until the speakers distorted, listening for any explanation. A raccoon outside, pipes in the walls, some acoustic trick I hadn't considered. There wasn't one. The footsteps were real. Something was walking through my kitchen at 4 a.m., opening my refrigerator and leaving. The next night, I stayed up, sat in the living room with a clear view of the kitchen doorway, all the lights off, waiting. The hours crept past, midnight, 1, 2, 3. My eyes burned. My body ached for sleep, but I stayed awake, watching, listening. At 3:58, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, the way it does when the heat cycles off. Suddenly, sharply, like someone had opened a window to January. My breath fogged in front of my face. Frost formed on the glass of water I'd left on the coffee table. I couldn't move. Something had locked my muscles in place, pinned me to the couch like a specimen under glass. I could see the kitchen doorway, could see the darkness beyond it, could see... Something moved. Not footsteps this time, just movement. A shape passing through the darkness, there and gone in less than a second. Tall, thin, wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. It didn't walk so much as glide, crossing from the back door toward the refrigerator without making a sound. The refrigerator light clicked on. The door was open, I realized. Something had opened it. I saw a hand reach inside. Long fingers, too many joints, skin that looked gray in the pale light. It selected something, I couldn't see what, and withdrew. The door swung shut. The light clicked off. Footsteps finally, the same ones I'd heard on the recording, crossing back toward the door, toward the darkness, toward wherever it had come from. Then silence. The cold retreated, my muscles unlocked. I sat there until dawn, too afraid to move, too afraid to close my eyes. When the sun finally came up, I searched the kitchen with shaking hands. The back door was still locked. The deadbolt was still engaged. The chain was still on. But in the refrigerator, on the shelf where I'd left a plate of leftover chicken, there was an empty space. Something had taken it. Something that came every night at 4 a.m., that walked through locked doors, that moved in ways that human bodies couldn't. Something that had been eating my food while I slept. And something told me that food wasn't what it really wanted. I didn't sleep for 3 days, stayed awake on coffee and fear, watching the kitchen doorway, waiting for 4 a.m. to roll around. The thing came every night, right on schedule. I'd feel the temperature drop, feel my muscles lock, and watch that gray shape glide through the darkness to the refrigerator. It always took something. Leftovers, fruit, once an entire package of deli meat. Then it would retreat, and the paralysis would release, and I'd sit there shaking until dawn. On the third night, it noticed me watching. I was in my usual spot on the living room couch, frozen in place, tracking its movement through the kitchen. It had just closed the refrigerator door when it stopped, turned. Those long fingers twitched at its sides, and even though I couldn't see its face in the darkness, I felt its attention shift. Felt it looking at me the way I'd been looking at it. For a long, terrible moment, we stared at each other across the dark house. Then it tilted its head, a gesture that was almost curious, almost human, and walked toward me. I couldn't run, couldn't scream, could only watch as it crossed the threshold from kitchen to living room, each step bringing it closer to the light from the window, revealing details I hadn't seen before. The skin wasn't just gray, it was mottled, patchwork, like something stitched together from mismatched pieces. The joints bent in directions that made my stomach lurch. And the face. It didn't have a face, just smooth skin where features should be, unbroken except for a thin line where a mouth might go. That line opened as it approached, revealing darkness inside, darkness that went down and down forever. It stopped 3 feet from the couch, leaned down until that faceless head was level with mine. I could smell it now, something old and cold, like a basement that had never seen sunlight, like earth from a grave. The mouth line opened wider. A sound came out, not quite words, but close enough to understand. Not yet. Then it straightened, turned, and glided back through the kitchen, through the locked door, into whatever void had spawned it. The cold retreated, my muscles unlocked. I collapsed sideways onto the couch, gasping, crying, alive. Not yet. What did that mean? Not yet ready, not yet time, not yet hungry enough for whatever it really wanted. I thought about my mother, sleeping peacefully in her room, vulnerable, unaware. The next morning, I called my sister. Rachel listened to everything, the footsteps, the recordings, the thing I'd seen in my living room. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Connor," she said carefully, "have you been sleeping? Like, at all? Did you hear what I just told you? There's something in the house. Something that walks through walls and takes food and..." "I heard you. I'm just saying, maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional. You've been under so much stress with Mom, and sometimes..." I hung up. Of course she didn't believe me. Why would she? She was 1,000 miles away with her normal life and her normal problems. She hadn't felt the cold, hadn't seen the fingers with too many joints, hadn't heard that voice saying "not yet" in a tone that promised eventually. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Needed to find someone who'd believe me, who might know what this thing was and how to stop it. I found the forum on my 4th sleepless night. Some dark corner of the internet where people shared experiences too strange for mainstream consumption. Ghost sightings, alien encounters, creatures that defied explanation. Most of it was clearly fake, bad fiction dressed up as testimony, but buried in the noise, I found a thread that made my blood freeze. The title was "The Feeder in the House," posted 8 years ago by a user who'd since deleted their account. It started with footsteps at night, always the same time, 4 a.m. At first, I thought it was my father, who had Alzheimer's and wandered sometimes, but he was always asleep when I checked. The thing came every night for 6 weeks, took food from the kitchen. Then it stopped taking food. It started taking something else. The post went on. The user's father had deteriorated rapidly after the visits began, not just the Alzheimer's, but something deeper. He'd stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped responding to anything. The doctors couldn't explain it. He died 3 weeks after the footsteps began, and the user described him at the end as empty, like something had scooped out everything that made him a person. The final line of the post, it was feeding on him. The food was just practice, just learning what we are, how we work. Then it found the real meal. I thought about my mother, about the dementia that was already stealing pieces of her, making her vulnerable in ways she didn't even understand. I thought about the thing in my kitchen, patient and regular, visiting every night like it was establishing a routine. Not yet. It was waiting, preparing, getting ready for the main course. I read every response in the thread, searching for answers. Most were useless. Sympathy, skepticism, suggestions to call a priest. But one comment, buried near the bottom, caught my attention. You can't kill it. You can't reason with it. The only thing that's ever worked is denying it access. Salt at the thresholds, iron at the windows, and someone awake, watching every night it tries to come. It feeds on the unaware, the sleeping, the forgotten. Stay awake, stay vigilant. Don't let it catch you sleeping, or you'll wake up empty too. Salt, iron, vigilance. It wasn't much, but it was something. I made my preparations that afternoon, lined every doorway with salt, hung iron nails above every window, set up cameras in every room so I'd have proof if I needed it. My mother watched me work with confused eyes, asking questions I couldn't answer. Why are you doing that, honey? Is something wrong? Where's your father? I told her everything was fine. I told her I was just fixing up the house. I didn't tell her that something was coming for her every night, and the only thing standing between her and oblivion was her son and a line of table salt. That night, I sat in the living room with a bag of salt in my lap and an iron fireplace poker across my knees. 4 a.m. came. The temperature dropped, and for the first time, the thing didn't come through the back door. It came through my mother's bedroom wall. I heard her scream first. Not the confused murmuring of a dementia episode, a real scream, raw and terrified, the sound of someone confronting something their mind couldn't process. I was off the couch before I knew I was moving, poker in hand, racing down the hallway toward her room. The door was open. The cold poured out of it like water, so intense it burned my skin. Inside, I could see my mother pressed against the headboard of her bed, eyes wide, mouth still open from the scream. And standing between her and me, blocking my path, was the thing. It had fully emerged from the wall, that gray patchwork body solidifying in the darkness. Its back was to me, its attention fixed on my mother. One of those long arms was extended toward her, those impossible fingers reaching, almost touching her face. I didn't think. I swung the poker. Iron connected with the thing's shoulder, and it screamed, a sound like metal scraping against metal, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. It whirled toward me, that mouth line splitting wide, and I saw what was inside. Not darkness, like I'd thought before. Faces, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all pressed together, all silent, all staring out from the void inside it with empty eyes. The faces of everyone it had ever consumed. I swung again. The thing retreated, hissing, that faceless head swiveling between me and my mother like it was calculating odds. The iron seemed to hurt it, not kill it, but slow it down, make it cautious. I stepped between it and the bed, poker raised, putting myself in the path of whatever came next. "Get out," I said. My voice was shaking, but the words came out clear. "Get out of this house. She's not yours." The mouth line curled into something like a smile. That voice emerged again, scraping against the inside of my skull. "She's already ours." It pointed at my mother. I risked a glance back, just for a second, and saw what it meant. Her eyes were wrong, not terrified anymore. Vacant. That flat, empty stare I'd seen in the worst days of her dementia, when she looked at me without recognition, without presence. But this was deeper. This was absence on a fundamental level, like someone had reached into her head and scooped out everything that made her who she was. No. I turned back to the thing, rage replacing fear. No, you don't get to have her. I lunged. The poker caught it in the center of its chest. I felt resistance, not like flesh, more like pushing through thick mud, and then I was through, the iron buried in whatever passed for its body. The thing convulsed, those mismatched limbs thrashing, that mouth line stretching impossibly wide. The faces inside screamed silently, all of them at once, a chorus of the stolen. I twisted the poker, pulled it free, swung again, until the thing collapsed in on itself, folding into a shape that shouldn't fit in 3 dimensions. The cold retreated. The screaming stopped. What was left of the creature lay on my mother's bedroom floor, twitching, diminished, somehow smaller than it had been. I stood over it, chest heaving, poker dripping with something that wasn't blood. "She's not yours," I said again. "None of them were yours." The thing looked up at me. Without a face, without eyes, it still managed to convey something like hatred, something like hunger. "We will return." Then it dissolved, sank into the floor like water into sand, leaving nothing behind but the cold and the silence and the echo of all those stolen faces. I dropped the poker, ran to my mother's bed. Her eyes were still vacant, still wrong, but as I took her hands, I saw something flicker in them. Recognition, faint but present. She was still in there, still fighting. "Mom! Mom! Can you hear me?" "Connor." Her voice was thin, confused. "Why is it so cold? Is the heat broken again?" I laughed, a desperate, relieved sound that was closer to a sob. She was back. Whatever the thing had started to take, it hadn't finished. She was still here. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, sat beside her bed with the poker across my lap, watching the walls, waiting for the thing to return. It didn't. Dawn came, gray and ordinary, and my mother woke up asking about breakfast like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The thing had said we, not I. There were more of them, and they would return. I spent the next week fortifying the house. Salt wasn't enough. I'd proven that. The thing had simply found another way in, avoided the thresholds I'd protected, come through the walls like they didn't exist. I needed something stronger. The forum had other suggestions buried in its depths. Iron embedded in the walls themselves. Symbols drawn in certain combinations at certain points. And something called a vigil circle. A protected space where the things couldn't enter, couldn't reach, couldn't feed. I found a man who claimed to know how to make one. He lived 3 towns over, an old guy named Harold who'd spent 40 years fighting what he called the Hollow Ones. I drove to meet him on a Tuesday morning, leaving my mother with a neighbor who thought I was running errands. Harold looked at me across his cluttered kitchen table and nodded slowly. "Seen one, have you? Actually seen it?" It tried to take my mother. They always go for the vulnerable ones, the sick, the old, the ones already slipping away. Easier to finish what nature started. He poured coffee I didn't drink. Most people, they just hear the footsteps, feel the cold, never see what's making it. You're different. You fought back. I heard it. With iron. Heard it, yeah. Didn't kill it. Can't kill them. Not really. They're not alive the way we understand alive. They're more like holes, vacuums, hungry spaces that need filling. He leaned forward, eyes sharp despite his age. But you can keep them out. You can protect what's yours, if you're willing to pay the price. What price? Harold smiled, but there was no humor in it. The vigil circle takes a piece of whoever makes it. A memory, usually. Something precious. Something that matters. The hollow ones feed on what makes us human. So to keep them out, you have to give up some of your humanity first. A memory. Something precious. I thought about my mother, about the pieces of her that had already been stolen by disease. about the thing in her bedroom, reaching for what little remained. "Tell me how," I said. Harold nodded and began to explain. The ritual took 3 days to prepare. Harold gave me a list of materials: iron filings, salt from 3 different sources, ash from a fire that had burned continuously for 24 hours. The symbols had to be drawn in a specific order, at specific times, with specific intentions held firmly in mind. One mistake, he warned, and the circle wouldn't just fail. It would invite them in. I followed his instructions exactly. Drew the symbols on the floor of my mother's bedroom in a mixture of ash and iron, forming a ring around her bed. Lined the walls with salt. Hung iron nails from the ceiling in patterns Harold had sketched on the back of a napkin. My mother watched me work with that familiar confusion, asking why I was making such a mess, asking when dinner would be ready, asking for my father. I told her I was keeping her safe. She smiled and said that was nice, dear. The final step was the sacrifice. Harold had explained it clearly. The circle needed an anchor, something human to hold it in place, to give it weight in a world where the hollow ones existed outside normal rules. That anchor was memory. I had to choose something precious, something that mattered, and give it up willingly. The circle would take it, absorb it, use it as a foundation, and I would never get it back. I knew what I had to give. The night I completed the circle, I knelt at its edge and closed my eyes. I thought about my mother, not the woman she was now, confused and fading, but the woman she'd been. Teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, her hands steady on the seat. Sitting beside my bed when I had nightmares, singing songs I couldn't quite remember anymore. Dancing with my father in the kitchen while dinner burned and nobody cared. I chose one memory, the clearest, the brightest, the one I'd held on to through every hard year since childhood. My 6th birthday. A cake she'd made from scratch, lopsided and perfect. My father lifting me onto his shoulders, her face, young and beautiful, laughing at something I'd said. I let it go. The pain was unlike anything I'd experienced. Not physical, deeper, like something being torn out of my chest, out of my mind. The memory dissolved, became part of the circle, and where it had been, there was only absence. A blank space in my history that I knew had once held something important, but couldn't remember what. The symbols flared bright, then faded. The circle was complete. That night, they came in force. Not one hollow one, 3 of them, emerging from different walls simultaneously, their gray bodies solidifying in the darkness. The cold was so intense, the windows cracked. Frost crawled across every surface, and I felt that familiar paralysis trying to lock my muscles, trying to pin me in place. But I was inside the circle, and inside the circle, their power couldn't reach me. I stood at my mother's bedside, poker in hand, and watched them press against the invisible barrier. Their faceless heads swiveled toward her, toward me, toward the symbols that kept them at bay. That scraping voice emerged from all 3 at once, a chorus of hunger. "Give her to us. No, she is fading already. Let us finish. No." They threw themselves against the circle. The barrier held. I saw the symbols glow with each impact, saw the iron filings tremble, saw the salt shift but not break. Harold had been right. The anchor held. My sacrifice held. But they didn't stop. Wave after wave, impact after impact, testing every inch of the circle's perimeter. I could feel the barrier weakening, feel the memory I'd given up burning away under their assault. It wasn't going to last forever. Nothing lasted forever. I thought about what Harold had said. You can't kill them. They're not alive the way we understand alive. They're holes, vacuums. Vacuums that needed filling. I looked at the symbols on the floor, at the circle that was holding them back, and I understood, suddenly, what I had to do. I stepped outside the circle. The paralysis hit immediately, that freezing grip locking my muscles, my lungs, my heart. The three hollow ones turned toward me, sensing vulnerability, sensing prey. They glided closer, those impossible fingers reaching, those mouth lines splitting wide to reveal the faces inside. I raised the poker, drove it into the floor at my feet, right at the edge of the circle. And I spoke the words Harold had taught me. The words that would expand the circle, that would push its boundaries outward, that would trap anything inside when it closed. The symbols flared. The circle expanded, not around my mother's bed anymore, but around the entire room, around me, around them. The hollow ones screamed. I felt the circle close like a fist, felt it compress around everything inside, felt the barrier become a cage instead of a shield. The hollow ones thrashed, tried to dissolve into the walls, tried to escape the way they'd come. They couldn't. The circle held them. The anchor held them. And then the circle began to collapse. Not fail, collapse inward, compressing, crushing. The hollow ones folded in on themselves, those gray bodies crumpling like paper. The faces inside their mouths screamed silently, finally released, finally freed. I watched them dissolve, not into the floor this time, but into nothing, into the void they'd come from, into oblivion. When it was over, I was lying on my mother's bedroom floor, gasping for breath, the poker clutched in my hands. The symbols were burned into the wood, permanent scars that would never fade. The salt was scattered. The iron nails had fallen from the ceiling, but the hollow ones were gone. My mother was sitting up in bed, looking at me with clear eyes, clearer than they'd been in months. "Connor," she said, "what happened? Why are you on the floor?" I laughed, cried, pulled myself up and hugged her, feeling her solid and present and alive in my arms. "Nothing, Mom," I said. "Everything's okay now." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. The hollow ones never came back. I kept the vigil for months anyway, staying awake until dawn, watching the walls, listening for footsteps that never came. Old habits die hard, and fear dies harder. But the house stayed quiet. The kitchen stayed empty at 4 a.m. Whatever I'd done that night, it had worked. My mother's dementia didn't disappear. That would have been too much like a fairy tale. And this was never a fairy tale. But it slowed. The doctors couldn't explain it, called it a plateau, a lucky break, one of those remissions that sometimes happened with no clear cause. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just took her to her appointments and brought her home and made sure she ate dinner and watched her favorite shows. She still forgot things, still called me by my father's name sometimes, still wandered at night, looking for rooms that didn't exist. But there was more of her present than there had been before the hollow ones came. More clarity, more recognition, more of the mother I remembered. The mother I remembered. That phrase hits differently now. I know I sacrificed a memory to complete the circle. I know it was something precious, something important, something from my childhood that I'd held on to for decades. But I can't remember what it was. There's just a blank space, a gap in my history, a sense of loss without an object. Sometimes I'll see something, a birthday candle, a chocolate cake, my mother laughing, and I'll feel a tug of recognition that never resolves into anything concrete. That's the price I paid, a piece of myself, given up to protect what mattered more. I don't regret it. Harold came to visit once, a few months after everything happened. He walked through the house slowly, examining the burned symbols, the salt traces, the iron still hanging in the windows. When he finished, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and nodded. "You did good," he said. "Better than good. Most people, they can't expand a circle like that. Takes something special, something worth protecting. Will they come back? Ever? Not those ones. You collapsed them, sent them back to wherever they came from before they learned to be hungry." He paused, considering. but there are always more. Always holes in the world, always spaces that need filling. You watch long enough, you'll see them, circling, waiting. What do I do if they come? Harold smiled, that same humorless expression I remembered from our first meeting. Same thing you did before. You fight, you sacrifice, you protect what's yours. He stood, pushing back from the table. And you teach someone else when you're ready. Pass on what you know, so when you're gone, someone else can keep the vigil. He left me with a box of notes, 40 years of research on the hollow ones, their patterns, their weaknesses. I've added my own observations since then. Someday, maybe I'll find someone to pass it to. Someone who hears footsteps at 4 a.m. and doesn't dismiss them. Someone willing to pay the price. My mother passed away 2 years later, peacefully, in her sleep, with me holding her hand. The dementia had progressed by then, stolen most of what remained, but on her last night, she looked at me with clear eyes and said my name, my real name, not my father's, and told me she loved me. I like to think she knew what I'd done for her, what I'd given up. I like to think somewhere in the parts of her that were still present, she understood. The house is mine now. I could sell it, move somewhere else, start fresh in a place without burned symbols on the bedroom floor. But I stay. The vigil circle is still here, dormant, but ready. If the hollow ones ever return, to this house, to this town, to anyone I care about, I'll be prepared. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. The things that go bump in the night aren't always imagination. The footsteps you hear when you're alone aren't always the house settling. Sometimes there are hungry things in the darkness, patient things, things that feed on what makes us human and leave only emptiness behind. Pay attention to the sounds you dismiss, the cold spots you explain away, the feeling of being watched when no one's there. Trust your instincts, trust your fear. And if you ever hear footsteps in your kitchen at 4 a.m., if you ever feel that creeping cold, that sense of something wrong, don't assume it's nothing. Check anyway, because the hollow ones are always circling, always waiting, always hungry, and the only thing standing between them and the people you love is you. I still wake up at 4 a.m. sometimes. Habit, mostly. Fear, partly. I lie in bed and listen to the silence, count the seconds, wait for footsteps that never come. And when the clock ticks past 4:01, 4:02, 4:03, I let myself breathe again. Another night survived, another vigil kept. The house stays quiet, but I keep listening anyway, because that's what it means to protect something. You don't stop watching just because the danger seems to have passed. You don't stop fighting just because you won once. You keep the vigil, and you pray it's enough.